There we go. You're live now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and I will call to order the Board of Selectmen meeting of February 13th, 2023. The time is 7:01 p.m. I've got an opening statement to read as usual. This open meeting of the Northborough Board of Selectmen is being conducted remotely consistent with the July 16th, 2022 Act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. All members of the Northborough Board of Selectmen are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows the Northborough Board of Selectmen to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Members of the public who wish to view the live stream of this meeting may do so by going to Northborough Remote Meetings on YouTube via the link posted on the agenda. Ensuring public access does not ensure participation unless participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. I'll now go around the virtual room and confirm that board members and then staff can be heard and hear us. Let's see, just in the order in which I see people on my screen. Scott Rogers.
Present.
Kristen Wickstead.
Here.
Jason Perot.
Present.
Julianne Hirsch.
Here.
Also with us, Town Administrator John Kader.
Present.
Fire Chief Dave Parenti.
Present.
Assistant Town Administrator Becca Meekins.
Present.
DPW Director Scott Charpentier.
Present.
And Police Chief Bill Liver. I couldn't hear you, Bill.
Present.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir. And we also have Northborough Cable with us, providing cable access for the evening. Let's get started. First item on our agenda, as always, is public comment. If there are any members of the public who wish to comment on anything that is particularly not on our agenda, you're welcome to raise your hand. And I see one hand up. Whoop, and the hand went away. And, oh, all right. I'm just going to wait for a second because I see hands coming and going. I'm going to give it just a moment. All right. Lisa Maselli, I'm bringing you in. Hi, Lisa.
Good evening. Hi, Mitch and board members. You always throw me a curveball when you finish your statement, because I was reading the agenda today, and my comment was about the agenda. So I think I'm going to keep with it only because I couldn't think of something else off the agenda right now. So thank you for bearing with me. My comment tonight is to express my interest in having a professional interim administrator facilitate the work of that office and a town-wide discussion of how the citizens want to direct their future visions and goals. I think that would be very helpful, and I'd love to see something like that happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your input. Okay, I see no other hands raised, so we'll move along to the agenda. And first item on our agenda is approval of the set of meeting minutes for January 23rd, 2023. Would someone like to make a motion or have any discussion on that? Kristen is speaking, however, is muted. These things happen.
Yes. I can make a motion.
Sure, go ahead.
I move the board vote to approve the January 23rd, 2023 meeting minutes as presented.
Second.
Motion's been made by Kristen, seconded by Julianne. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, let's see, Julianne?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
Kristen?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
I also vote aye. Vote is unanimous in favor. Meeting minutes are approved. Thank you very much. Next up, we have discussion of draft legislative priorities. John, do you want to lead us through the beginning?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you. So, every year we send out to all of our boards and committees, all of our departments, a request for information if they are interested in identifying any issues or priorities that might be going to the state legislature that may impact the town of Northborough. We ask for their input. We then try to boil it down to a few, half a dozen or so talking points, the most important ones, of course. And then if there's usually a few pieces of legislation that we're tracking that we want to make sure that our delegation is aware of. So we do this sort of funnel process. We bring everything together, we compile it, we put a draft together, the board reviews it, signs off on it, and then we invite the delegation in it'll be our first meeting in March, where they'd come in, we'd send them the letter ahead of time. And it helps to frame up the discussion about the priorities of Northborough and what we're seeking from our legislative delegation. So, we have multiple representatives, senator, and so it's important that the board sort of frame up that discussion. So in your packet tonight, and again, the board's packet is available on the website if anybody'd like to open it up and follow along. We've hit on the key things that we're hoping to have discussions regarding with our delegation. What we'll do between now and your next meeting is to flush this out in the more standard format. We try to put numbers to things. If we want a statewide initiative for additional funding, we try to hit the state number, but we bring it home to what it means for Northborough. So just kind of going through the summary that we've provided to you in your packet. One of our top priorities has been for the last several years an increase in Chapter 90 transportation funds. This is a bond bill issued by the state that sends money to all the municipalities based on a formula, and they can use that money to fix their roadways, do drainage projects, and sidewalks. We've been asking that the state increase that from the 200 million to a level of 300 million. This was a top priority of the Mass Municipal Association at their annual conference. Unfortunately, the Healy-Driscoll administration filed a $400 million Chapter 90 bond bill over 2 years. So basically the 200,000. The difference is at 200 million. At 200 million, Northborough gets about $500,000. At 300 million, we would get closer to 8. That 300,000 would go a long way to closing the gap between our roadway and increase our investment in our roads, and our pavement condition index would be on a higher, a steeper improvement trend. The other thing is we've identified significant sidewalk and complete street projects, and that funding would go a long way. Unfortunately, again, the governor's office does not seem inclined to increase that, but it is a top priority of the town. When you look at the things that we receive in terms of requests from our residents, it's walkability, roadways, drainage. These are things that people are very much in favor of seeing increased. We have to spend about $1.1 million a year to maintain our current pavement condition index. This is for just our roadways. We need additional money if we're going to make more headway with regard to sidewalk improvements or enhancements, and as well as just drainage issues in general. So that has been identified as a continuing top priority of the town. The next is Chapter 70. This is our state aid. When you look at what the town receives in state aid, about 75% of that is Chapter 90 education aid. Unfortunately, with the Student Opportunity Act that's been approved and implemented by the legislature, the vast majority of any new revenues that they receive are being diverted to districts in need. For better or for worse, Northborough is a minimum aid community. We get $30 per student. We don't have a significant population in need, so we aren't going to see much in the way of that increase. But one of the things we have asked for is that minimum aid of $30 per student, we've asked that be 100, which is also the position of the Mass Municipal Association. The third major category is the special education circuit breaker and regional transportation reimbursements. These are very important funding sources, although they don't flow through the budget. This is aid that comes directly to the school department. The regional transportation goes directly to the high school. And just for those of you that haven't been around long, when communities formed a regional school, they were enticed to do that because the legislature promised to pick up the tab for transportation. they've never fully honored that. So it's always been less than 100%, and it moves around. But it is critical because if the state doesn't fund transportation at the high school level, it just means whatever shortfall they leave the high school with, it just comes to each Southborough and Northborough in the form of a higher assessment. And obviously circuit breaker is critical. I think you're going to hear something very unique from the superintendent this year with regard to especially the K-8 school budget. They are not coming in at the target figure of 3.5. Right now, they're at 4.9%, and I don't think they're going to get much below that. And increases in special education is one of the major driving forces behind that. So again, as you see year to year, unexpected special education costs, that special education circuit breaker program is supposed to soften the blow and smooth it out. And again, we want to make sure that they know that full funding of that program is a priority for Northborough. And then the last main category is what we refer to as UGA, or unrestricted general government aid. For those of you, again, who have been around for a long time, that's lottery money that's ours, that the legislature calls something different, so they don't have to address the fact that typically during a recession, they steal that money for their own needs, and historically they've done that. But unrestricted general government aid is mostly lottery proceeds, which were passed to benefit general government and schools at the local level. So we want to make sure we've had a really good history with the Baker administration of matching increases in unrestricted general government aid. It's about 25% of our state aid comes in this form, but that matching in general what the increases are in state revenues. And the next item on the agenda, I'll get into that a little bit more because they've had their revenue consensus hearing and they have agreement on what they think revenues at the state level are going to increase. Our point is, in terms of sharing, we want to make sure that if the state, whatever the state aid is going up, that our local unrestricted general government aid goes up a comparable amount. It's the priority of the MMA. We hope that the Healy-Driscoll administration will honor the informal agreement. There's nothing that's been laid out in terms of formal, there's no law or policy, but that's been the general practice under the Baker administration. It's one that we advocated for under the Patrick administration. And so we want to see that continue. So it's going to be important to emphasize that. Those are the big categories that we want to make sure that our legislative delegation knows. Those programs have a huge impact on our level of service and the level of taxes in Northborough. And we want to make sure that they honor the programs they've committed to and that they understand the importance of the ones that we're asking them to elevate maybe to a higher level, like the Chapter 90. And it's important to show them in real terms specifically what the impacts on Northborough will be. And in the final letter, we put numbers to those things to show. So beyond that, we try to then focus on a couple of big items that are coming through that are really important to us. Number one, we spent a lot of time at the MMA conference at the annual meeting speaking about this. I personally advocated for it through the Fiscal Policy Committee, and that is to create a municipal public safety or public building authority. So there's a bill that's making its way through the legislature that's trying to create a program similar to the Massachusetts School Building Authority or the Library Trustees Program, where the state offers grants for large building projects. So I always say it's ironic that you can get a state grant to help you build a library, but you can't get one to build a fire station or a police station or a town hall building. Clearly, the issue here is making sure that there is a dedicated funding source. Absent that, it's a tough sell. But this is one that we've talked about. We were hopeful that maybe, at least even on a temporary basis, given some of the supply chain issues and the escalation of costs, that they might use some of the state ARPA funding to do a project or a temporary bill or program that would help communities like Northborough that is going to be entering the market at a point when we're seeing a lot of volatility. So, but we'd like to see that as a permanent program moving forward. The second of the secondary priorities is a permanent option for remote public meetings. As you know, this has been very well received by the residents to allow public participation through remote meetings. So there are bills that would allow that to become a permanent option for remote meetings and participation. And we're cautiously optimistic that that's one has a lot of support from everybody and will be enacted. The next one is one that we've tried to work through the Mass Municipal Association. We're trying to update the procurement laws. Strange, we have very elaborate procurement laws, but through some sort of a fluke of a process, the legislature changed the rules for procurement laws. They're different for K-8 for school systems than they are for the town government now. And so what we've asked is that those two different standards be one and the same. It makes no sense why they would do that, but it would close a loophole essentially that allows using a request for proposals or qualification-based selection for purchases between 10,000 and 100,000. So they changed the rules for the schools, but they're still holding us to the old standards. This one, in my opinion, should be a no-brainer, but we need to draw their attention to why this is important. And the last of the secondary priorities is the streaming entertainment, the entertainment operators' use of public way. This is essentially a bill that seeks to level the playing field for companies that are no longer, they're not cable companies, but they're basically using those rights of way and those wires to stream services like Netflix and Hulu and Disney and all those. What we're seeing over the years is that the traditional cable service is people are cutting the cord, they're going more to these streaming services, but the way our local access is funded is through the cable franchise fees. And when we had a little bit of a conversation when we renewed the Verizon license, is that they're technically not a cable company, right? So it's all becoming a little murkier, but one of the things that we're looking to bolster is that to get a clear, dedicated funding source to continue to pay for local access, because as this moves forward, we're seeing more people cutting the cord, the revenue source is becoming more tenuous, and it's going to be more difficult to maintain local access across all municipalities. So that's a bill that we're advocating support for. So those are the primary and secondary priorities that we've identified that have come up through the departments and the boards and committees. What we're looking for is any feedback from the board of any additional priorities or anything else they'd like modified. If not, we will put together the standard letter. You can approve it at your next meeting, and then we will send it out to the delegation, and they will be at your first meeting in March. I think it's really important. This is going to be a new process for a new rep and a new senator. Megan Kilcoyne's been through this, at least once or twice with the town, but it's going to be really important that as a community, we speak with one voice about what the priorities are for the Northborough community. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And we have provided, the past letters, so you can see on the town administrator's website is our current legislative priorities, so people can see the format of the letter and the focus on that. What we want to try to do is just not throw 100 things. There's a limited amount of time for them to come in and speak with us. We really want to focus on the most important priority and secondary priority items for us. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Sure. Any questions or input from members of the board? Scott, then Julianne.
Yeah, thanks, John, and for putting that together. And just want to, echo and emphasize, we see the critical need on those Chapter 90 funds, right? Almost everything we're looking at from a capital perspective and the projects we need, the backlogs and things that we forecast in the upcoming years. That's just got to be the #1 priority to get that fully funded, because almost everything that we want to do, from downtown revitalization to sidewalks to roadways to complete streets, that would be the best funding source for those efforts if they came to us through those channels.
And it would certainly take a lot of pressure off of the capital improvement plan. Right now, we're using one-time revenues to kind of float the level that we need to be investing. And through additional work by the DBW director, we've identified, 2.1 million in existing sidewalks, as you mentioned. And then we've got 25 prioritized projects that were approved by the board back in December through the Complete Streets program. And that's $3.5 to $4.5 million of additional projects. So Chapter 90 is just an absolute priority for us, as it is for most towns.
Julianne?
So I'd like my fellow selectmen's opinion on this, but I think it would be important to let the legislators know that e-commerce is changing a lot of our quality of life in Northborough and a lot of other towns. And even as we use the highways and roads in Massachusetts. So if there's anything they can do to require or add more rest stops for truckers or things that will help us control this so that it doesn't get so that we feel like we're coexisting with e-commerce better.
Julianne, did you have any specific legislative priority to go with that? I don't have a problem with.
I couldn't find any bills that are. There are some studies that have been done by the metropolitan group in the Boston area, pointing out how idling trucks is affecting air quality. Trucks in the Boston area, there's a lot of problems, it seems, with deliveries, trucks just parking anywhere. But we've had concerns here, and not that everything doesn't necessarily have to be a specific bill, but if they're hearing from other legislators that this is a problem in towns, I'd just like them to be aware that in Northborough we feel that this is something that they might be able to help us with. But I welcome everybody else's opinion on that.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with bills, particularly to recommend, not that I disagree with the intent of some help dealing with the changing traffic patterns that we've experienced here. Maybe that's just a discussion item to occur with the legislators when we meet with them, and just sort of ask them to keep an eye out for bills and other ways that they might be able to help us with that.
Mm-hmm.
Kristen, you are muted. Sorry, this is your second warning.
Yeah, I know. I'm gonna have 3 strikes and I'm out tonight, man. So I was actually just thinking about this earlier this evening, and how, and I didn't think of it under the agenda item of legislative priorities, probably because it's not a specific bill, but it is something I would like to talk about with our local representatives, because having such a larger number of trucks on the roads, and we are not the only town dealing with this, and I do feel like it's a state issue that at some point they are going to have to put together a bill. So to address traffic and safety with large trucks on small roads and small neighborhoods or that kind of thing. So I'm not really sure what it would look like, and I don't know what other towns are doing, but I would welcome a discussion about it.
Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I just want to go back to the chair's statement, essentially, that in phrasing, having this discussion with our legislative representatives, we are trying to focus on very specific initiatives that we would like them to support. And those initiatives are very, fairly well defined in terms of exactly what action we would like them to take. what the finances are with respect to those actions. So I certainly understand and appreciate the concern, wanting to have broader discussions, but I think for the purpose of this particular conversation and the particular priorities we're trying to convey, there are specific things that we're trying to emphasize and trying to have them focus on in the legislative activities that they're going to be engaging in over the next year, and trying to muster critical support for some of those initiatives, not only for Northborough's benefit, but many of these are for the benefit of many communities, regional districts, whatever. Hopefully they have broad appeal and they enjoy broad support from the legislative representation across a number of communities in addition to Northborough. So I understand wanting to have the conversation with our legislative representatives about that particular concern, but I do not want to detract from the specific things that they can advocate for and take action on in this legislative session. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Adding a little bit to my earlier comment, I think it's reasonable to mention some of these things during the verbal discussion. Just because there isn't a bill to take action on this session yet doesn't mean that we can't advocate for such a bill, or whether it be this session or some future session. I think it's important for the legislators to hear the concerns of the board, perhaps that aren't yet being addressed by the legislature. I want to mention a couple of the items that John, that you included in your secondary section. One is the permanent option for remote meetings. I completely agree. I think that's critical and important. It almost happened last session, but fell apart at the last second. The one thing I would very much like to add to that is mention of hybrid meetings. I think that's the way in the future for municipal meetings. The Senate did approve a bill that included some detailed requirements for hybrid meetings, which I thought was very, very good. That bill did not provide any funding, but there was a parallel bill that would have provided funding in a broad sense for the same purpose. If they can put that together and get the House on board, I think that's even better than a permanent remote option. But certainly at minimum, the remote option needs to be continued and made permanent. I think that'll happen. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I didn't wait to be recognized. I agree with that, in that we were hopeful. We saw the legislature taking this up and putting some money towards it, which for small communities like us would be very helpful. So like everything, we're hoping that that comes back around and that they put a little bit of money towards that. Again, that would be a good use of their ARPA funds, I think.
Sure. And also, I'm strongly supportive of finding new ways for funding for the cable department. That's a very important department in town that has become even more important over the last few years through COVID and everything else. The demands on them have increased while their funding has decreased because of the cutting of the cord and the way that is funded. I know there are a couple of different ideas floating around, both at the state and federal level, and as far as ways to improve that match. One is the mechanism that you outline in the letter, John, and another is to move that franchise fee type arrangement onto the internet bill, so it's still the wire going into your home, as opposed to the service. Doesn't really matter to me. I think there are pros and cons with either approach, but I hope that they can act on that before too long, because at some point there will be a breaking point for public access stations, and we'll be asked to make a decision as to whether we want to continue such a department at all. And if so, we would have to fund it with tax dollars, which generally haven't been supporting that department in Northborough or most other communities. Other than that, I had no items to add or comments on the items. I completely agree. I look forward to the discussion with our legislatures 1 month from today.
Okay, so based on that, we'll put the draft together for you to sign off on at your next meeting. And then, so if there's anything else specific, please get it to me as soon as you can. So we'll get the letter out, approved at your next meeting and out. they're all just, the good news is they're all locked up for your first meeting in March. So they've all confirmed that they're coming in to the meeting. So we'll look forward to having them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Next on our agenda is an update on state aid. John, you gave us a little bit of a hint earlier.
Yeah, so just briefly, in a typical year, the state has what's called a revenue consensus hearing, and this is where the administration, the legislature, the Department of Revenue, as well as outside economists, Moody's Analytics, which is the hired arm of the Department of Revenue, to do an analysis. The Mass Taxpayers Foundation comes in, and basically they all meet and they go through, what do we think is going to happen to the Massachusetts economy in the upcoming year? This is called the revenue consensus hearing. The point of this exercise is to get consensus on how much revenues will go up at the state level so they can begin putting their budgets together. So that normally happens in mid-December. Unfortunately, because of the change over in the administration, that revenue consensus hearing did not happen until January 24th. I actually attended it and watched the entire process and discussion of all the presenters. The other thing that's unique this year is normally the governor has to provide his or her budget by the third week in January. That's that's why the revenue consensus hearing takes place in mid-December. Governor's budget has to come out by the third Wednesday, I believe, in January. And that's our first look at what state aid might look like for the town of Northborough. This year, because of the change of administration, the revenue consensus hearing took place January 24th. So around when normally we would see the first look at the state budget. And the governor has until March 1st to submit her budget. So we still don't have a look at that. But what I can update you on is what transpired at the hearing. I'll cut to the chase. The legislature and the administration have agreed on and announced that the tax collection are expected to grow 1.6% in 2024. So what was interesting is when you heard the Department of Revenue, typically the mass taxpayer is always the most pessimistic, 0 to -1, right? Then you have some private economists, Moody's Analytics, and they range between 2 to 6%. But the bottom line is that the legislature and the administration is going to pick a reasonably conservative number to start with. Which is why, as the process moves forward, the governor's budget is our first look at state aid, and then the House and then the Senate. And they'll have another quarter of revenues to look at. And sometimes you'll see that these numbers get adjusted again. But as of right now, sitting here today, the revenue consensus growth factor is 1.6%. So not a big number. Now, historically, the town of Northborough, even when that number was significantly higher, the town of Northborough generally only sees about 1 to 1.5% increase in state aid on an annual basis. And that, again, is because the majority of state aid is distributed through the Education Chapter 70 formula. And the majority increases go to districts in need. And we are not one of those districts in need. So we're a minimum aid community. So I would anticipate, as I mentioned back in December, our budget model is that we are counting on 1% in additional state aid. This is problematic for us because as of right now, budgets are going up 3.5% to the school budget right now. K-8 is going up almost 5%. As our state aid languishes behind the increases in the budget, it becomes a smaller and smaller revenue source, which means it's just made up by local taxes. So, so sitting here today, the state is only estimating 1.6%. I'm telling you that we'll be lucky to see, 1.5% at most. So the assumptions and the budget model that we have, I think, is a solid one. One thing that the Mass Municipal Association keeps arguing, they argued in fiscal 2023, and they're arguing again here, is that what happens is the state changes the benchmark. So they modify, so they assume revenue is going to go up a certain amount. When they get more data that shows revenues going up more, they increase that. Well, what we're arguing is you need to make sure that you're basing the percentage increase, particularly for the unrestricted aid that we talked about a few moments ago, that it's based on the estimate, not the modified estimates. Because if they keep raising the estimates, then the percentage increase for the next year, gets smaller and smaller. So right now, the MMA, and this is on page 2 of the handout I gave you on this, the MMA's recommended calculation shows that the consensus revenue forecast for fiscal 2024 is 2.1% above the base that state leaders originally used to enact the fiscal 23 spending levels last July. So the state's saying 1.6%, the MMA is arguing for 2.1%. At the end of the day, guys, Northborough isn't going to see much more than 1%. So again, just giving you an update on where things stand. We look forward to receiving the governor's budget, and as soon as we do, we'll convey that information to you. The piece that we always want to watch, and I always give you a caveat on, is state aid. There's 2 components. One is how much additional aid that we're going to get from the state. The other is the state charges us for certain things. They charge us for mosquito control. They charge us for being adjacent to an MBTA station. They charge us for all sorts of things, charter school reimbursements. So state aid goes up, and then we have to look at on a relative basis how much those assessments goes up. The net of those 2 historically is about 1% for us, and has been for the last 5-6+ years. So that's where we are. That's the update. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I always find it interesting to listen to economists because they have a bunch of caveats and none of them agree on anything. So, but the one positive thing I did take out of this that I would relay, when they went through this process last year, lots and lots and lots of talk about a recessionary headwinds. That aspect receded considerably. But the one thing that everybody did say is we saw a big bounce, after the economy came back from vaccinations and everything opening back up and all that getting caught up. What they all cautioned against was don't expect that those big increases that they saw last year and a little bit of this year, that in everybody's opinion was that's going to level out, and we're going to see more modest increases for the foreseeable future. So no big permanent swing upwards. And then of course they all said, and of course, there can always be a recession too. So, but by and large, it was positive for modest increases, at least in the upcoming fiscal year and the next couple is how they couched it. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, John. Any questions, members of the board? Julianne.
John, are these modest increases, does that include the new tax we have on $1 million incomes and above? Was there discussion about where that money's going, or?
No, it was more their discussion is more general overall economic growth and what the key revenue sources, of which income taxes make up, I think, about 57% of the state budget. There's income tax, capital gains, and then you have sales tax. Those are their main sources. And so they didn't specifically get into it's factored into overall what the revenues are going to go up, but they didn't get into specifically, Julianne, what if they're how they're going to carve that money out or how that might be used. So
okay, thanks.
Again, in general, the vast majority of increases in state aid is being funneled through the Student Opportunity Act going to school districts in need. That's just what's happened for the last several years.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Next on our agenda, we have discussion and potential votes on American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA grant spending for Proctor School roof, fire engine replacement, and DPW tight tank compliance project. I'm going to suggest that a sort of a way of thinking through this item, because we've got 3 separate items in one agenda. First, I think we should deal with each separately. I hope no one has any trouble with that, since they're different projects. And second, that we deal first with, for an item, whether we think as a board we support moving forward with that project this year, independent of funding source. And if the answer is yes, then we discuss the funding source. And the funding source could be ARPA, it could be town meeting, because I suspect that if we don't fund a project, but we want to go forward with it, it goes on the warrant, and then town meeting would deal with it the way they would any other project. Does anyone have any concerns with that approach? Just to keep things simple. Okay. First item, just going in order of the agenda, is the Proctor School roof. We received some good information, of course, in the packet. We received emails from Superintendent Martineau and a couple of school committee members about that project. I suspect we're reasonably educated on that project. It's also been discussed by the board in the past. John, I don't know if there's anything additional that you want to say about the project specifically.
Yeah, if I may, a couple of key points is, when the board released $38,000 of ARPA funds last year to deal with some of the immediate drainage and pooling issues to help buy us some time on that project. At that point in time, the board had authorized the superintendent to file a statement of interest, which gets us into the Mass School Building Authority's queue for potential funding, grant funding for approximately 45% of the roof. And we were hopeful at that time that we would see some funding under that program. We've been successful in obtaining that in the past. Unfortunately, we did receive a letter in October 26th of 2022, MSBA saying your roof doesn't qualify. They have a lot of projects, and that roof, unfortunately, they just look at the age of the roof, and I don't think they put as much weight on the actual status of the roof. More concerning than that was immediately after that, on November 2nd, they issued a press release. This is MSBA issued a press release that said the accelerated repair program is on hold. And it's on hold because MSBA has a number of projects that were approved, were out to bid, or under construction. And what they were finding was supply chain issues and escalation in building costs and so forth, were putting a bunch of those projects in question. So basically what they decided to do was they're not taking any more projects in the queue, and they're trying to use those funds to bolster up the projects that have already been approved or are under construction. So what that means for the town of Northborough is we're not getting funded this cycle, and we're not getting funded next cycle. And the roof at this point will not hold until that program potentially comes back on. You assume it'll come back on in year 3 for us, but we don't know what will transpire. The other issue is that we have the Z School roof that is in the queue for, I want to say it's fiscal 26, if I'm not mistaken, in the capital plan. That's for $2 million. So that roof will go into the queue for MSBA, and there's a real need to clear out this project because it's just not going to make it through the MSBA funding cycle because of the impacts of the pandemic. So that's why, if you remember in the original memo, going back in July 15th, that we were at least anticipating at least 50% of the project being paid for or funded through a grant. That is not going to happen. The other piece of information that I would share with you is we did have Sean Thompson, our facilities manager, work with a number of roofers to go out and look at that roof to see if there was any way possible to extend the life on it. And short of expending hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy very limited amount of time, like a year or 2, the recommendation, very strong recommendation, was that's bad money to spend, and you're better off just to move forward, get the roof buttoned up, and deal with the leaks and the issues. So that's the update on MSBA and that project, and that's why it's in here for $1.7 million for your consideration.
Thank you. So the first topic of discussion is, do we believe that this project should be funded this year so it can go ahead. I hope no members of the board think it should not be. I'll just state that. If there are any members of the board that feel like we should not replace the roof now, go ahead and let us know, and let's talk about that. The roof is deteriorating. I did speak with a representative of MSBA at the MMA conference last month, and he gave me essentially the same report about the accelerated repair program's delay, possibly even more pessimistic that it might not be just 2 years that it's on hold. And we've seen the photos of what's going on with the roof and the building. I really think as far as the project, we need to go ahead and do that. Are there any members of the board that want to speak to that, either counter to what I said or anything else about the timing of this project? Okay, Julianne first, then Jason.
Actually, Jason had his hand up before me.
Oh, earlier, sure. Go ahead, Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Julianne. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we have enough understanding of this project, the need, the urgency, the cost impact, and we've had some submissions of emails from some members of the community advocating that we proceed forward. So I'm certainly advocating that we proceed immediately, and that I assume that will be the sentiment of most of the board members.
Julianne.
Well, I just wanted to clarify, are you asking a two-part question? Is the first part?
I have only proposed sort of a statement of interest, if you will, in the first part, which is, does the board support getting the roof repaired this, basically this summer? I mean, a school can't replace a roof while kids are in session. So it would be a summer project.
Okay. And then part two would be how it's funded. Okay.
Correct.
So we're on part one now.
We're on part one.
Okay.
Okay. Does anyone?
Yeah,
Again,
I agree with Jason.
Okay. Yes. So I hope that puts certainly the majority of the comments that we've received at some level of rest. Then the next question is, how do we fund it? And the choices are basically ARPA or town meeting or some combination of the two. I will lead a little bit with some of my thoughts on that. ARPA was provided for COVID-related costs initially, and that's how I have always looked at it. It was certainly a COVID-related funding mechanism. We're not restricted in terms of COVID-related costs. I look at the school construction, the roof construction project as something the town was going to do anyway. It's been on the capital plan since before COVID hit. I think we all agree we need to do it. So initially, my thought was that it wasn't suitable for ARPA. However, the fact that MSBA declined to help us with that, with their share, which I think was going to be around 42 or 45% of the costs. That's really due to COVID, because projects got more expensive. They wanted to fund the projects that were in the queue, and they didn't want to accept anything else. So from my perspective, funding the share of what MSBA would have covered with this out of ARPA would be, from my perspective, consistent with the way the board has discussed ARPA in recent months. But I'm absolutely happy to hear from anybody. Scott, I just saw your hand. I don't know if I missed a hand before that. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I see the logic of what you're saying there, but I think in terms of the urgency, if we released some of the funding or used some of the funding through ARPA and then went to town meeting with the remaining funds, the overall project wouldn't be accelerated as it needs to. So I would say that it makes, due to the urgency of this, I think a single funding source and that immediate needs allows to get all the preparation to be in place for potentially construction this summer is what's needed.
Yeah, I don't believe that town meeting funding would put that at risk. I mean, they can't start the project until essentially around July 1st, right after school lets out. So I have not been given. I did ask the school department for a schedule for 2 schedules, one with ARPA funding and one without. I didn't receive a response, so I don't believe there is any difference in funding expedience. John, go ahead.
Yeah, there is some difference in that the ARPA funding is available immediately. That would allow them to issue the bid, sign contracts, get everything ready sooner to get the project done. The project can be done while kids are in the building, but obviously the preference would be to get as much of it done in terms of noise and distraction during the summer months. So, but that would allow the project, again, move forward with the bidding, the design bidding, and documents, construction contracts immediately. Otherwise, we would have to wait until July 1.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never heard of a major roof project being done with kids in a school. That's
happens all the time.
Yeah. Hey, Christian, did I see your hand go up or no?
No, I don't think so. No, I mean, I definitely didn't put my hand up, and then I was thinking maybe I would ask
I apologize.
a question, but I think I'm okay.
Okay. Jason.
Yes. In trying to split the funding sources for this project between ARPA and quote town meeting unquote, what exactly do you mean by town meeting? What specific funding source are you referring to?
I assume at a level of a little under $1 million that it would be debt. Town has a pretty low percentage of debt right now. We can talk a little bit about future debt in a moment if you'd like, but I would leave that up to John to determine the specific source of funding that he'd recommend. Again, as if ARPA didn't exist and MSBA covered, roughly $765,000 of this, what would we do? That's that question.
Well, okay, that's not the circumstance we find ourselves in. We find ourselves in with ARPA money, which we have accepted as general revenue and applicable to any municipal operation that we tend to undertake. And the capital program and these capital projects, to some extent, have been delayed in their execution and suffered from cost escalation because of restraint we exercised with the budget over the pandemic years.
This project, I think, has always been funded, scheduled on the capital plan for 24.
It certainly was on the timeline. That's certainly true. But I would not agree that because of that fact, we should discount the use of ARPA funding for the complete cost of the project.
My argument is based on some of the other requests and determinations still to be made, and some already been spoken about. I'll mention that in a minute, but I want to give everyone a chance to weigh in initially, and I'll go through some of the other thoughts that I have on ARPA and reasons for holding on to it. Julianne. I'm sorry, Jason, did you want to follow up before I moved along?
I was just going to respond to your comment. If some decision process of this specific project is in some way dependent on the disposition of the other projects, then we need to be talking about all of them, not just this one in isolation without fully understanding the impacts on the other projects.
Julianne?
Yeah, I mean, as much as we'd like to talk about each and every one individually, and we have to, we do have to keep in mind the many requests that we received and the others on the table tonight. But for me, I would like some verification on this timeline. I need to hear from the superintendent about whether or not this project would start before the children are out of school. And if it went to town meeting, how, for whatever amount, whether those bids and everything could be ready to go, and we have someone in line that the week after the children leave school. So I kind of need more verification on that timeline.
Yeah, I wish we would have received a little bit more information there. But again, generally speaking, if we didn't have this ARPA money, this would have I'm sure, been on the April town meeting warrant and would have gotten done this summer. So I don't see a reason that that's at risk. They can certainly do the bids in advance of the funding being available. And I know under at least some circumstances, money from town meeting can be available before July 1st through a ban or something else if that's needed. And again, if we partially fund this, the design part would easily be fundable immediately. Scott.
I guess I'm a little concerned about you individually figuring out, timelines and what's possible and what's not possible in terms of public procurement. So I'd really want town administration to weigh in and either confirm what you've said or whatever.
Yeah. All right, John. So it's a fair question.
So I had a conversation with the superintendent today about this, and releasing the funds sooner allows them to get going sooner. One of the issues is getting contractors to bid on projects. They don't like to bid on projects that aren't funded because there's no guarantee the project's going to move forward. They incur a lot of costs to do that. But it would get the schools to immediately, literally they could immediately move forward with the project to get it squared up, with the goal of trying to get into as much of the actual construction done over the summer months. I believe it's a 4 to 6 week construction period. So they're confident that they'd be able to get it done. That's based on a conversation I had with the superintendent. Just if I may, by way of clarification, I do want to remind folks just in terms of the ARPA funds, when it was first approved, if you remember, there were a lot of really strange strings attached and very specific buckets that it could be used for. On January 6th of last year, the final rule came out, and I think it was to acknowledge the fact that it wasn't just specific projects that were impacted by the pandemic, but the general economic impacts, similar to what we just talked about with MSBA. Northborough saw the same thing. Our revenues dropped off, our free cash dropped off. There were implications very significantly because we made a policy decision to postpone some capital projects to give ourselves a little bit more liquidity to deal with whatever issues might come up in terms of the pandemic. But as budgets get tighter and the economy is recovering, there's been implications, and we clearly have capital projects that are bunching up on us. And there has been an overall impact. And that's why in the January 6th ruling, they basically said, you can spend this money not just on COVID-related issues, but we understand the ripple effect through your whole operation. If you have less than 10 million in ARPA funds, and we have 4.5 million, you can use it on any regular municipal service or expenditure. So the funding, there is no restriction whatsoever from the federal government on how the funds can be used. And capital is how most communities are choosing to use the lion's share of it. But just so we're clear.
Yeah. I don't believe anyone made an argument that this was an ineligible
it's not restricted,
cost. Yeah. Yes. Scott, you had your hand up again.
Yeah, and then one of John's comments reminded me of the benefit of being able to then have the full funding source and get fully those bids out, is that we capture the contractors earlier in their cycles. So it further guarantees that we would be able to get the construction done in the timeline that we want to do if we have all those bids out and are first in line amongst those construction companies and the professionals we need. So there is a benefit in that respect from schedule to capture those resources early, get them on board, even if there's a timeline you wouldn't start to a particular date. At least you have those folks under contract early.
Personally, I'm not too terribly concerned about that for the reasons that there are a number of communities that don't have the financial resources to go ahead and even consider doing a roof without MSBA participation, or don't have a roof that's in as severe needs. They may want to wait the couple of years until MSBA restarts the accelerated repair program. So I'm not terribly concerned, based on some folks I know in the industry, that it doesn't look like it's going to be an especially busy year for roofers. I'm I'm not a roofer myself. I can't guarantee that, but that seems logical to me. Julianne, then I have a couple of further comments, but Julianne, go ahead.
Again, could somebody comment on the period of time that we would be, okay, let's just say we say we're going to fund the 45% that MSBA would have funded. What amount of time are we actually losing here? If tonight we decided on this a smaller amount, waited for town meeting for the other part of the total 1.7 million, and how much, what are we talking? Will the roof be done by the time the kids get to school? Can we get some of it rolling with 45% of 1.7 million is $765,000. Can we get some of it started?
I'll ask John. I don't know if you have an answer to that.
You need the full, you can't buy half a roof. So you need authorization for the full roof. And then the balance, which would be funded with debt, would be effective July 1st. Because the issue is, in order for us to move forward, eventually you'd issue bans, but the way to get the project moving faster would be to advance yourself the money. That advance it cannot cross fiscal years. So that advance cannot take place prior to July 1. So
okay,
we will not be moving
right.
forward before July 1.
Okay, so if we did one portion and one portion, we couldn't do anything until July 1st, is what you're saying.
Well, what would you do is if you got, you release half the funds and then for some reason it doesn't pass town meeting, what do you can't do the project.
No, I understand that.
I don't know if there's design and engineering, bid spec preparation. Any of those things would certainly be able to be funded and started on right away.
So we have to go through a design process anyway, first?
Need to create the bid specs, and that's usually involves an architect. But John, I don't know whether that's already been done, whether the school department had funding for that.
No, the funding they had was they just did an assessment of the roof.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Yep. Okay. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, so, two further comments on the urgency. One, so we've just talked about if you're splitting the funds and you try to do some of the project and then you're putting the rest of the project at risk based on a town meeting vote, that's a risk of getting the project done. The other element of urgency is the new roof isn't going to be dependent on when students return to school. The old roof is leaking. So the longer we delay, the roof continues to leak and we continue to have the problems in the school. So we should do everything we can to have the full project funded as soon as possible, to get the roof fixed as soon as possible, so we don't have continued damage inside. So we've got a failing roof, not necessarily trying to time when to get it done by the time the students return to school. We have a failing roof that needs to be replaced.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen nothing from the school department that makes me think that they're planning to actually do construction on the roof and have the roof open while kids are in session. That is unusual. It can be done in emergency situations where you have a little extra space in a school to move the kids around, and you do it in sort of multiple phases across the roof, but that increases the cost. I haven't heard anything that's the project. I think this is planned to be, and it's certainly sized appropriately to be a typical summer roof project. Jason.
I just wanted to confirm that any spending article financed by debt at town meeting requires a 2/3 vote to pass. Is that correct, John?
Yes.
So 2/3 is a higher threshold, and it may or may not be the case that financially or philosophically, certain voters may not be inclined to support that structure. I would not want to put this particular project at risk of a debt finance vote, quite frankly. We have the ARPA money, we can proceed immediately. It's probably unquestionably the most urgent of the three projects we're talking about tonight. I don't see the point of trying to fine tune it here in respect to parceling out ARPA money and debt financing for this.
Our town has always been strong supporters of education in Northborough. I would be exceptionally shocked if town meeting refused to fund a school roof. I do want to say a little bit more about my thoughts for ARPA funding, and some of my reasons isn't just to hold on to it for the sake of holding on to it. We have received a significant number of requests, and over the past year, those have increased. We know that, as John mentioned, there's a risk of some recession headwinds. Those seem to be improving a bit. One advantage of holding on to them for another year is that we can help balance out any issues that may get worse next year. There are things going on in the world that could affect the global economy and the US economy and the Massachusetts economy in potentially very negative ways. I think while we have $4.5 million sitting in the bank, it is beneficial to hold on to that to deal with any unexpected expenses or unexpected revenue losses from the state that may occur next year. We have almost 2 years before we have to commit the funds as to how we want to use them. End of calendar year 24 is when we need to commit the funds. Then we have 2 more years after that to fully expend them. We have a very expensive project coming next year, hopefully, assuming that the fire station building committee gets started. If that comes to town meeting this time next year, or even a fall town meeting at some point in the future, that is a project that has been impacted by cost escalation, which I think related to COVID. That is an opportunity. If we haven't found higher priority items by then, that's another opportunity where we could defer some debt to an extremely sizable project. Downtown redevelopment, the master plan implementation committee is currently studying the downtown in great detail. I strongly suspect there will be a report back from them when their work is complete on possibly some parcels that might be advantageous for the town to acquire or acquire easements to. I think it is helpful, given that those negotiations have to sometimes be very, very timely. That might be advantageous for the town to have funding sources available to deal with those. I have nothing particular to suggest there because the report hasn't come out yet. The Complete Streets project we know is beginning to get underway. It may be helpful for the town, for the board to use some ARPA funds for some of those projects. We know that there are some roadways in town that are in need of assistance. We have received requests from the Assabet Hill neighborhood people to help with their road, which is in pretty rough shape and isn't slated to be dealt with on the capital plan for, I think, at least another 5 years. We've received multiple requests from boards and committees and individuals over issues regarding mental health crises in town. We've received requests from the Historical Society. And another issue that we may need to tackle is we know that there's the MBTA requirement for approving zoning changes for higher density housing. It is possible that the town might not want to approve those. There's a lot of concern among the community for some of the projects that have been discussed, and that puts grants at risk. And if that doesn't go forward, we may need to compensate for some of the grants. So those are just some of the things that concern me and reasons that my preference is to hold on to this money a little bit longer to see what issues might come up that we might not be able to address if we spend the vast majority of this ARPA money on capital items tonight. Scott, you've been raising your hand, and then Kristen, you'll go next.
Yeah, so my trouble with this, and you just went through a list of things, is that we were supposed to have a categorization of all of the ARPA input such that we could do some prioritization. And we continue to wait on the delivery from you of that categorization. So it was good to be reminded about some of these possibilities coming up. but we have nothing in hand from you that you promised to deliver. So we're left with the potential of projects. Yes, we know they're out there. We know many of them go through the capital planning process, and we've been working on some of those aspects the last few weeks through those boards and committees. I'm unable to make a decision comparing defined critical projects of a known time frame and cost versus those other possibilities. So to not act upon these projects and not to use the money we have in hand, and instead have a portion or some of these projects go to a debt vote at town meeting, puts at risk the entire project. As Jason mentioned, we could set up the possibility of funding a portion of the roof through ARPA, try to make plans to incur debt and have that go before the voters at town meeting. And the voters that are first, or the voters that have the perspective, why are you raising my taxes when you're sitting on a pile of cash? They will tend to vote against it. The voters that have other projects that they think are more important than the school will vote against it. I know we've had a history of supporting the schools, and I think we can rely on that, but we put the roof project at risk in its entirety by splitting the funding like this. And I'm concerned that we won't reach the 2/3 majority we would need to finance the rest of the project, because we're going to have a substantial amount of people that will say, why are you raising my taxes when you're sitting on a pile of cash? I think we're going to hear that by many people at town meeting.
Kristen.
I just noticed that the superintendent is in the attendees, and I was wondering if we could ask him. Julianne had some questions that it sounded like it would be very handy if he happened to call in, and I think he did. So,
Well, yeah, he's been on the line. I knew he was there, but he has not raised his hand, so I didn't want to call him out in expectation of anything.
I called him out.
Oh, look at that! He has raised his hand. I don't.
I just thought it would be nice to get some more questions answered. That would make me feel better.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I will bring Greg in as a special guest. Greg, if you could unmute, and for the formality, just let folks know who you are.
Sure. So thank you, Greg Martineau, Superintendent. And thank you for the discussion and debate over the Proctor roof. First of all, I appreciate the acknowledgement that the roof does need to be completed. It is a high priority for the school district and the school committee. I did have a chance to speak with Garland Company today about the Proctor roof, and did ask some very specific questions around timing of the project and its recommendations. The first recommendation that Garland Company did provide was the fact that the timing to get the bids out and have a bid in hand is April. He is seeing the queuing up of roofing projects for this upcoming months. And he thinks that in order to get this project completed by the end of the summer, that an April bid in hand would give us the most surety in terms of moving forward with that timeline. I also did ask him about the roofing project and having school in session. If the project were to start in June before students were to get out, would it be feasible? And he did indicate that this type of roofing project could be done when kids are in session. They're not removing the entirety of the roof, but rather the coating that is on the roof. So although not ideal, it is possible to move forward with the project while students are in session. From a school district perspective, I think that we have a high sense of urgency in replacing this roof. We appreciate the ARPA funds that were provided to the district of $38,000 to mitigate some of the drainage issues. That has helped. But from my perspective at this point in time, it's the sooner we can allocate the funds as a town, the sooner we can get this this roof replaced. And my perspective is, the funding source is really not up to me, it's up to the town. And we'll move forward whatever the town decides is the most beneficial funding source.
Greg, follow-up question, if I could. Do you want to go ahead and start the project before school is in session? I know you said it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like to. My biggest concern is getting the bid in hand. We did talk about the requirement for design and the architecture. That cost is about $30,000 according to the Garland Company. That would allow us to do the work to get a bid out in the timeline that he recommended, April, and potentially if we get all of the bid process, the design, so forth, we could actually start late May, early June, which would then just give us more surety around finishing the project for the start of the school year. He said anywhere between a month to 2 months, depending on the contractor and the contractor's sense of urgency in terms of completing the project. Ideally, though, Mitch, the project would happen when school is out and conclude before school returns to session.
Yeah, I can't imagine how disruptive it would be to elementary school kids to have to hear the noise of roof work going on above them during school. I've seen that occur. It's not. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but it's not far from ideal. While Greg is here as a special guest, do any board members have additional questions for him? Kristen.
Yeah. So talking about the distraction of having roofers working, I was thinking how distracting it is if there's leaking and buckets and that kind of thing. And I think most of what I've heard about the conditions of the roof are either the pictures we've seen in our packets or sort of word of mouth stories. But could the superintendent just tell us a little more about how the roof is affecting the students right now?
Sure. So I think that, there are classrooms in the building where there are leaks when it does rain or there's snow melt. Teachers accommodate by, again, putting buckets to capture the leaks. So I think there's no disagreement that there is a sense of urgency to get this roof replaced, and it is impacting the overall student experience at Proctor School more than the issue around the leaks that we have. I'm more concerned about the amount of moisture the building is holding as a result of the failing roof and the impact that has had over the past several years on air quality conditions in the building.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any other questions for Greg? Julianne.
Well, this is on a more positive note, but Superintendent Martineau, could you just comment on the possibility with a new roof of putting on solar panels, which would be beneficial to the school?
Sure. So the district did endeavor a solar feasibility study about 5 years ago and did a assessment of all of our school buildings. Proctor School has the potential for solar panels. However, the recommendation was to have the roof replaced before consideration. So once the roof is is repaired and replaced, then we can continue to pursue solar panels on the roof to mitigate some of the energy costs and reduce our carbon footprint. And can I just make one last comment? I do appreciate the board's, the select board and the community's commitment to education. I've never felt anything but support. And, even this evening, although a debate about funding source, I still feel that the select board is supporting the project, which is really important moving forward.
Thank you. Greg, thank you very much for joining us. Okay. We do have some hands up in the audience. Do any board members wish to make any comment before I recognize the audience members who wish to participate, and then we'll return to, sure, that's Jason.
I just wanted to suggest we acknowledge the input we've received from the Appropriations Committee, and I think Financial Planning Committee maybe has also had some occasion to review this. Being the committees that are by charter responsible for I should say, review and recommendation of appropriations budget and capital spending, I think their input is, merited some acknowledgement.
Thank you for mentioning that, Jason. Okay. Let's see. First, in order of raising of the hands, Laura Zeiton. Laura, I'm bringing you in.
Hi, is this just for the roof feedback, or are you looking for the feedback on all the ARPA topics?
If you have something specific for one of the projects, this would be an ideal time. If it doesn't fit into either of the other categories, I suspect now a brief comment is acceptable.
Thank you. I'll be quick. So first is, I hope we can get the roof sorted out. It's been very nerve-wracking, and I hope that we can reach an agreement really quickly for Proctor. The other feedback about ARPA funding is regarding hybrid meetings. If we can continue to just prioritize that, I love the engagement that we've had from people. And if we can just really figure out the best way to have both people be able to participate as we go forward, that's my only other request at this time. But thanks for hearing out. Laura Zeiton, 17 Franklin Circle. Sorry about that. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you very much, Laura. Next up in order, Fran Backstrom. Fran, if you could unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Fran, you have unmuted yourself, but I don't hear you. Anyone else hearing Fran? Okay. Give it another couple of seconds, and then I'll release you, but you're welcome to raise your hand again if you sort out your audio issues. Okay, Fran, I'm sending you back into the wilderness, sorry. Tim Kalin, you're up next. Tim, if you could unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Tim Kalin, 42 Davis Street. I am the chair of the Appropriations Committee, and I am calling in on behalf of the Appropriations Committee with their full support. We held a meeting this week and voted unanimously to support the ARPA funds being used for not only the Proctor School roof project, but also a new fire engine and also the tight tank project. The biggest reason being, there's a lot of talk about the use of the ARPA funds and what's the best way, and to unnecessarily raise residents' taxes while we have the money in the bank just doesn't seem to make sense. It seems the best way to use the ARPA money is to indirectly return that to the residents by not raising their taxes and using the funds to pay for things like these projects that would require the issuance of debt, which would lead to higher taxes. As everybody's mentioned, there's recession talk. Inflation's been very high. People are coming out of the pandemic. One of the best things that this community can do and this board can do for those people is to not raise their taxes when you have the money in the bank to be used for these projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Mike Hodge.
Hi, Mike Hodge, 2 Beechwood Circle. I'm Vice Chair of the Town Financial Planning Committee. At our previous meeting, our committee voted unanimously to encourage the Select Board to fund with ARPA funds the school roof, the fire engine, and the DPW tight tank. Our thought process was these are projects that the town has consistently supported. They have been in the queue, they have been vetted, they've been discussed, and the funds, these are projects that have to get done. This is great money to use it for, doesn't impact the taxes. If there are future projects that the selectmen are looking at, ideally, these are projects that are transparent and do go through all boards and committees, and the town does get a say in them. So we would just encourage you folks tonight to support funding those 3 items with ARPA. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Kelly Gannett. Kelly, if you could unmute yourself. Hello.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much. Kelly Gannett, 69 Northgate Road. I am calling in because I am a Proctor parent, and I have 2 girls in 4th and 5th grade at Proctor, and they have been impacted by the moisture at the school since 2018. The school was shut down for a late start because of mold in the building. We've had leaks in their classrooms. Last year, my daughter came home to tell me that she had a bucket on her desk, next to her desk, collecting water. It's a distraction. It's potentially hazardous, a danger for slippery floors. I know that the roof has been fixed and they patch it, but we know the building is susceptible to mold. And the sooner we can get it fixed and replaced, the better. I know you mentioned about not having the kids in session when roof repairs done. We've already been in session during roof repairs, and we've been in session when they replaced the roof, the pitched roof over the gym. So the kids have been in session during roof repairs and things, and I don't think that bit of distraction is something to put off for voting for the use of the ARPA funds. So thank you so much.
You're
Sorry,
muted.
Lisa Maselli, I'm bringing you in. I was muted. Just 1 strike against me. Lisa, if you could identify yourself.
Mitch, Lisa Maselli, 13 Maple Street. I feel that the Proctor School roof is without a doubt something that needs to be done. Everybody in town would like their children to be in a safe environment in a learning situation. The other 2 items, though, I don't feel are necessary and shouldn't come out of ARPA money. And with the Finance Committee coming forward, I do know that in the last 2 meetings, there were only 3 members attending. And I don't know if questions were asked about the actual need of replacing the entire fire truck or what it would cost to fix it. And I think that we run quickly into what we've done in the past, and there's a lot of us now that would like to do something different. So let's keep those things in a process that we could find out how much it would cost to fix and start to use some of our money for other things besides vehicles all the time. I'd like to see some more than complete streets talk. I'd like to see, even if we buy paint and create crosswalks and do things with that are not as expensive. But I think we have to attend to some of those, what we've wanted on those sidewalks and crosswalks for years. And even though that the state is not going to be able to give us any more money, we can't shrug our shoulders and say they aren't necessary. So, so that is what I have to put in for tonight.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, Fran.
It looks to me like Mitch froze. Is everyone else still alive here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he froze.
Or there, if you could try to allow Fran in.
Oh, there he is.
Oh,
Mitch, just so you know, you kind of
Yeah.
froze for about 15, 20 seconds there.
okay.
I think he's frozen again.
And he's doing a good impression of freezing again there.
Julianne, I guess you're in charge.
So well, I'm not a host, but can anybody see if Fran is still waiting to speak, or?
She doesn't have her hand up. I don't know.
Fran dropped out of the meeting, and Julianne, you are a co-host.
Oh, okay. So I do see that on my
Just put
screen,
your hand back up.
she has a raised hand. Can we let her in, or?
Yeah, maybe Chief Parenti can do it.
Chief Parenti can take care of it.
Hi, Fran.
Hi, can you hear me this time?
Yeah.
Yes, very well, thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you. So this is Fran Backstrand. I'm calling from sunny Myrtle Beach, South Carolina on a very old computer, which is why I did not know how to do the audio. But I am at 76 Cedar Hill Road in Northborough normally. I do just want to say that everything that I've watched and participated in when we've been talking about ARPA funding, the Proctor School roof has been the priority. Safety, health, and everything else. I don't see any good reason why we wouldn't use that ARPA money, get the project going. To select person, Wickstead's point, it is as distracting and a concern for distraction for the children to be in an environment that they're currently in, as opposed to the roof being on. So I do really hope, if nothing else this evening, you do move forward on supporting, funding it, pre-town meeting, get it going, and move on with the other two. Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. It looks like no one else has a raised hand. I feel awkward about moving this vote along. Yes, Jason.
Yeah, I think we can probably wait a few more minutes to see if Mitch can reconnect before we were to proceed with a vote. But I would like to say that the three projects we have in front of us are not discretionary or delayable. These are three projects that have some time urgency to them. You have the school roof issue, you have the fire engine, and I'll ask Chief Parenti probably to speak to that, because it was suggested that perhaps we could just repair it and keep it in service rather than replacing it, which I think we've already addressed in a prior meeting. And then third, the DEP regulatory compliance issue for tight water tank or tight tank, I should say, is again not something that we can choose not to do. It's something that does need to be done, and so it's more a question of agreeing or getting to the financing of these projects, and not whether or not they can be further delayed or postponed. I'd asked Julianne, if you could, I'd like to ask Chief Parenti to comment on the condition of the fire engine and the viability of continued repair as opposed to replacement.
So before we do that, Mitch just notified us that he's trying to get back online, and I did see another person, Megan, somebody who raised their hand. Is she still there?
There's a Morgan Doyle with a hand.
Oh, sorry. Can we let her in?
That's
Okay, Morgan, you're in.
That's one of our firefighters, Julianne.
Oh, okay. So that's probably about, okay. So
Morgan? He's not
Morgan,
speaking.
are you there? You're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Is there something?
I'll move him out for now. If he wants to speak, he can raise his hand again. Mitch came back in. You have another hand up, Julian.
And
Okay,
That would-
my apologies. I don't know what was going on with my internet service. Joining on my iPad. I'm gonna my video for a second, go to another room so you don't see me shaking around. I'll be right back.
okay. So Morgan Doyle has left us.
Yeah, I assume it was an inadvertent hand raise.
Okay.
You have another hand up though.
Okay, we're ready.
You want me to move her in? Okay.
Please.
Susie, you're in.
Hi, Susie Sislicka, 8 Emerson Road. I had sent everyone an email earlier today. I decided to give a call in as well, just to further speak about the Proctor school conditions and what was going on with the kids in the school. Moldapalooza, as I referred to it in our letter, did really impact our kids more than I had referred to in the letter earlier. They had to start school later than the other kids. Yes, we took them to Davis Farmland, and we did have, I mean, it was awesome. There was no one in Davis Farmland but me and my 3 kids. So that was kind of cool. But it really impacted my son as a first grader, that he had to go to school on a Saturday and we had to go to school when other kids had half days. I will say, and this is just like word of mouth, when they go back to school in August and September, a lot of the kids come home with headaches. Like, as moms, we're all talking about it. Like, is there mold? What's going on? You go into the classrooms. I mean, not only do you have air purifiers, you have the dehumidifiers. I let my kids wear shorts. And I know when they get to middle school, they're all going to be in shorts. I understand that. I'm ready for it next year. But like, I let my kids wear shorts like all the time. It's like warm in their classrooms from the machines going all the time. And I really have a fear for the mold coming back. When I practiced or was a law student in California, I did do an internship working on a mold litigation case. It's not something to fool around with at all. This is something that needs to be fixed. If we have a way to fix it, I don't want to gamble. I have been involved in things that go to town meeting. Free kindergarten, as you all remember. We never wanted to bring it. We didn't want to bring it to a vote at town meeting. We knew that we would have the support. I would have dragged people there off the street to get the votes for free kindergarten. And I would do it again for this roof, but it's just not worth it. And I just implore you to use the ARPA funds for it. And that's basically it, because between the buckets, I have to tell my kids now, I have to say, can you just let mommy know if you see a bucket anywhere where one does not belong? So I can now. And then we go into basketball and there's a bucket and then like a trough, like to catch the water, and you're in the gym and you see buckets like in the gym where they're not supposed to be. And it's just not a very good environment. But I just want to thank you all. And I hope to see some of you for Kindness Week. I know Kristen's going to cover the rest of it. We're still making Valentine's Day boxes here a little late. But I just wanted to say thank you, and please vote for the ARPA funds for the Proctor roof. Thank you. I'm going to try. If you can disconnect me, I'll just try to do it. I'll lower my hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie.
I apologize, everyone, for the Wi-Fi issue at my house. Seemed to be with my computer. Wi-Fi on my iPad is fine, so I'm going to try to continue the meeting as best I can from here. Sorry that no one gets to see the Northborough door behind me for the rest of the meeting. I do want to check, do we have any other hands up? I know it's, we do have a couple here. Jason, I see your hand up. Do you want, it's fine, go ahead. We've had a number of comments. Jason,
Yes,
if you wanted to say anything before we bring
there
anybody
was
else in.
There was a earlier comment made by member of the public to the effect that perhaps the fire engine could be delayed or deferred and just simply repaired rather than replaced. I wanted to, I had asked earlier through Julianne, we didn't get to it yet, but I wanted to ask Chief Parenti to give some comment on that, some expert comment. It's something that we've already discussed in one of our prior meetings. I think the need is well established, but I'd just like to reinforce that if we could in response to that public comment.
Yeah, my preference is, I agree we should hear from the chief on that. My assumption is we're still on the school roof discussion and have not voted on that, correct? Again, I missed about 3 minutes of meeting. So let's wait on that one.
We didn't take any votes, right.
Right. Yeah, let's wait on that one until we're formally discussing the fire engine, then we'll definitely give the chief an opportunity to weigh in. Okay. All right, we have Morgan Doyle with a hand up. Morgan, I'm bringing you in.
Good evening. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you.
Perfect. I had to switch computers. Sorry about earlier. I
know how you feel.
Completely agree with the Proctor School being used for ARPA money. Mold and mildew, the effects of humidity, especially on the younger generation, is incredibly huge for me. Oh, I forgot to say. My name is Morgan Doyle. I live at 9 Davis Avenue here in Northborough. So yes, the Proctor School, I agree with the ARPA money completely to be used for that. The fire engine, I don't want to see us put money into repairs that then we have to go later and replace it in a couple of years, just like how we put money into the Proctor roof. I don't want to see us put the money into the roof to then have it need to be repaired again in a couple of years. Same exact points that were brought up earlier with that. And the DPW tank, I agree with for ARPA money as well.
Thank you, Morgan.
Could someone repeat
Chief,
that? I could barely hear.
he was speaking in support of ARPA funding for the roof.
Okay.
Yeah, and related items. Apologies, Marley Borden, bringing you in. Marley, if you could identify yourself.
Hi, Marilee Borden, 63 Little Pond Road. I apologize. I'm jumping in a little bit late to the meeting, so I might have missed some of the conversation, but I just want to weigh in that I think, I hope that you guys will look at spending the ARPA funding on a mix of capital projects, but also money that can be invested in our community in a way that will grow it and that we'll see some return on investment. So I understand the need to put, money towards certain capital projects. I think the Proctor roof is a primary example of that. But I think we also need to look at, if ARPA funds didn't exist, then some of this would be covered. If we needed a fire truck, our town's going to pay for a fire truck. And we've been there before and we've gotten that stuff approved in town meeting. If ARPA didn't exist, how would we be paying for that fire truck? And I recognize that things were set aside and budget was set aside because of the pandemic. And this is a way to remedy some of that. But I also know that the intent of the ARPA funding is also for economic recovery and economic development. And, there's been argument about whether it's a windfall or not. I've seen a million different economic experts and state government experts call it a windfall. And I think there's a real opportunity for us here to leverage that money to really get some return for our town. And I just question whether putting it all into capital is going to do that. So I hope that you guys will look at a balance of capital investments, but also looking at projects that are really going to have a greater return where we can see that money, come back twofold for our community.
Thank you very much, Marley. Okay, apologize. Control of such things is a little slower at the moment. I see no other hands up in the attendees. Let's return to board discussion and see if we can get this resolved. Any members have any further comment or thoughts or questions? I see none. I saw Julianne and then Jason, a split second later. Julianne?
So initially, I understood and agreed with the argument about doing it kind of half and half. But now that I hear that the roof is still continues to pose problems in the school, I guess I was hoping that the repairs we put in last year had solved that problem. And I think I'm thinking that we should do the project as soon as possible.
Apologize, I needed to relocate again as the room I was in was taken over by family. Okay, Jason, you had your hand up right after Julianne, if I remember right.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. If we are just focusing only on the school project, then I just will restate that I believe that we should put that project on the fastest track possible. And the way to do that is to fully fund it with ARPA, so that there isn't any question about funding, so there isn't any question about any further process delay to get all of the funding in place for the project.
Sure. The only thing I will add is obviously fully funding this project at 1.7 million removes additional flexibility for other projects, whether they be projects that were on the agenda tonight or anything in the future. I certainly want to see this project go forward. As others have mentioned, it is my highest priority project of the three on the agenda tonight. And perhaps it's maybe not the wisest idea to split the funding and look towards putting the other two onto the warrant as standalone items, as again they would have been otherwise. Any other comments or questions? And if somebody is raising their hand in the audience, I want to apologize. I cannot see that from my current device, so someone can yell out to me if that's the case.
There are no hands up.
Thank you very much, Chief. Any other questions or comments from the board? Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board vote to approve the release of $1.7 million in ARPA funds to the school department for purposes of replacing the flat roof at the Proctor Elementary School.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made by Julianne, seconded by Kristen. Any other discussion? If no, I will now. Come on. Sorry, I'm sorry. Now on two devices. Hold on just a second.
How dramatic.
Technology. All right, my laptop seems to be happy again. All right, we are now time for a vote. Julianne, how do you vote?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Kristen?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
I also vote aye. Vote is unanimous in favor. Congratulations, school department and Proctor people. You've got a roof. All right. So next item within this agenda is the. Still have to relaunch some of my screens here. I believe it's the fire engine. So continuing on. There was a question, and Jason, you asked the chief to provide some clarification. I think it's worthwhile getting a little bit of an update on that. First, sorry, I want to follow the same steps that we did for. Sorry, get my microphone back in here. Same steps that we did for the earlier project. First item is: do we want to go forward with this project this year? I know this has been on the capital plan. I know it was discussed last year. Does anyone have any thoughts or any opinions, particularly in the negative, to not go forward with it this year? Okay, I think we have. I'm in favor of it. Also, I think it does make sense for the chief to weigh in to address the comment that was raised earlier, and maybe tell us a little bit more about this truck for the public's benefit, Chief.
So the truck we're talking about is engine one. Engine one has been in the CIP for, it's due to be replaced. It's at the end of life. Not just the pump is problematic, but the truck itself is at end of life. If we were to put $20,000 into repairing the pump, I'm still replacing the truck. It makes sense. The truck is due to be replaced. Everything else is wearing out. The brakes are wearing out. It's your typical fire truck used for 20 years. It doesn't make sense to me to put $20,000 into a truck that I'm going to be. So it's on the CIP for this year anyway.
Okay, Jason. Thank you,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the chief's clarification, and I would point out that at this time, or I should say, nearly a year ago in the spring, when we were first seeing a list of these projects for consideration for ARPA, this fire engine, I think at that time, was listed at $800,000. With the passage of time, cost escalation and inflation, it's now listed on the docket here at $900,000. And so we certainly have saved any money through delay at this point. And it's a long time frame, long lead time item. I don't think that there's any purpose served in suggesting that we shouldn't do this project or that we should further delay this capital project.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I was speaking to some other fire chiefs, Lowell, Pepperell, Northampton, Marlboro, and Hudson. All were faced with that same thing. They had a truck coming up, needed to buy it. They found the prices were escalating so rapidly. They all decided to use ARPA funds. And the interesting one in Marlboro is it's a $1.3 million power truck that they're purchasing.
I can't hear the chief. Can anybody else?
I can't. I was worried it was my Wi-Fi. I'm glad it wasn't.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a bad connection. Again, I remember I was moved to the back room. I apologize. I spoke with several other chiefs in the last couple of weeks, and there's quite a few. There's Lowell, there's Pepperell, there's Northampton, Marlboro, Hudson, and they were all faced with the same type of thing. They had a truck that was due to be replaced in their capital. It's been in there for 6 years. They're ready to do it, and they found the prices were escalating so rapidly. They were able to use ARPA funds, get their orders, and lock those prices in, as opposed to having to pay greater price 6 months down the road or a year down the road. I just wanted to make the board aware of that.
Thanks, Chief. Julianne.
So if this goes to town meeting, how much money will we be asking for?
$900,000.
Okay, so and I just like to point out that we just spent $1.7 million and we're down to 2.55 left in the ARPA funds. So I think we better keep that in mind as we go through the next couple of items.
Comments, questions? Scott?
Yeah, just to, this is the second time this board has, talked about this piece of equipment, and, then we have the benefit in this cycle talking about it through both the Financial Planning Committee and the Appropriations Committee. So this is another item that is high risk. We risk of a mechanical failure on this. It's not just the cost, but, should the failure occur on the way to an incident, then we're talking delays as we wait for mutual aid to bring in an engine from another community. We also have the risk of further delays. So had we purchased this last year, it would have been $800,000 and a 1-year lead time. Now we're looking at $900,000 and a 2-year lead time. So this is something that's only getting worse and needs to be approached with a sense of urgency.
Kristen?
So I remember talking about this also, and I also remember the community meeting that we had last year. And I'm acknowledging Julianne's point that we did just spend $1.7 million. So that was a big chunk that honestly I wasn't, when we first had that community meeting at Trinity Church about how to spend the ARPA money and all the ideas everybody had, the $1.7 million for a Proctor School roof wasn't in there. But it's hard to, it's hard to say no to that kind of thing. And I do appreciate the fact that we want to be smart about our money, and we want to be, having been a fiscally conservative town for a long time, where this is the point of view of a lot of people in town, that this is the best way to spend the money. We have it in the bank. Let's just spend it on these big ticket items, and then we won't have to pay for them with debt. But we have this other point of view from all these other concerned citizens. Marilee Borden sort of spoke to this point, that a lot of people were really interested in other projects, which we haven't had a chance to talk about. And if we do say yes to these two other very large projects tonight, a lot of those other projects are never going to get talked about. And I really don't want that to be the case. So that's kind of where my mind is going right now.
Thank you. Kristen, Jason?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As far as other projects that haven't been talked about, to Scott Rogers' point earlier, it was the end of June last year, following the public input session, where two members of this board volunteered to collect, organize, and package all of the requests so that it could be presented to this board to make an evaluation and perhaps even begin funding some of those requests within the next 1 or 2 meetings. And that would have been the single July meeting and the single August meeting. Those meetings came and went. 2 meetings in September came and went. When we set the fall schedule, we added an extra meeting at the beginning of October with the idea that we were going to have a lot of work to do and would need extra meetings to do that work. That meeting was canceled because evidently to that point, 3 full months having elapsed since June, no work had been done to collect, gather, organize the information to present it to this board. And then finally, in part because of my prompting with emails, asking what the status was, we finally had it addressed at the October, I think it was 17th meeting. And what we had was this list of 1-line items with next to no description of any of these projects, no clarification of what those projects were, no dollar amounts attached to those projects, no context for who had proposed the project. And then at that meeting, it was suggested that what we needed to do was schedule a full working meeting of this board to do that work and put all that information together so we could make a full evaluation and make some decisions. And then since that meeting, the only thing we've done is entertain the request from Community Meals to fund their program, and otherwise haven't had any discussion, any further information, any organization, any comprehensive look at whatever the proposals have been submitted to date. So now here we are on the cusp of spring 2023 town meeting. We need to get the budget set. We need to get the warrant articles set. We need to get all of our funding articles set. And so the notion that we should delay further in expending some of this ARPA money because maybe something will turn up, maybe something will develop, maybe something will become more fully formed, to me just seems like a waste of time and effort when we have projects right in front of us with well-defined costs, well-defined risks, well-defined potential escalations. We have a huge fire station project coming up in the next cycle, hopefully, It's going to be an enormous debt issuance tied to that. And to suggest that these projects should be funded through debt on a piecemeal basis or something, with that thing looming, just doesn't make any sense at all to me as a separate debt issuance. So I would like an explanation of exactly what projects other members of this board foresee and in what dollar amounts and what timing to suggest that we should not proceed with the things we have on the table right now, where we understand the costs, we understand the tax impact, and we know exactly what we're doing for our citizens by spending the money we have in hand. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. These were the only three items that I was requested to put on the agenda. So those are the three here. I'm happy to put those on when you'd like. If Jason, if you have additional items you'd like to schedule for the next meeting.
Additional item I have is asking the two members of this board who are going to presumably do some work and present that information to us. Do you have a time frame? Do you have a schedule that you expect to complete that work?
I can put it on the next agenda if you'd like.
You're saying that the work to comprehensively organize all of the proposals that have been submitted will be on the agenda for the next meeting? Because I'm looking back and seeing like 7 months having elapsed to this point without that having been done. So who is going to do that work is my question.
I think that's a little bit off topic for an agenda item that's isolated to these three items. Scott, you had your hand up.
Yes, and you've made my point right there. I do not think it's off topic. You're asking us to defer projects that are in front of us for an unspecified list of projects that you committed to providing and have not provided. So I ask as well as the same question as Jason is, when will we have the categorized compilation of the public input to ARPA so that you can make good on wanting to get this information, promising to compile it, promising to make progress on it, and have done essentially nothing on these promises that you made to the public.
Yeah, this agenda was published late last week. Anyone could have asked me for that, and I would have had that ready for this meeting. Asking me now, I can't provide it right now. If you'd like, I'll provide it for our next meeting.
If you can provide what's needed in for the next meeting, I look forward to having that comprehensive package.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Again, we're trying to talk about the fire truck project. Julianne.
So in our packet, it said that if we did not fund the three items tonight, the average tax bill would go up by $61 per year. Now that we have agreed to fund the roof, that would probably, I'm just guessing, but it's probably reasonable that the average tax bill will be affected by about $30, which is less than $1 a week. And okay, yes, we haven't had the big discussion about ARPA. There's, we have attended to a lot of business, and I apologize for that, but you all have the list of the many, many, many items that have been requested. And I tend to also feel the way Marilee voiced the opinion that the ARPA money should be used for improving the quality of life in town, getting more return on investment, addressing problems that are not necessarily ever going to be in our capital improvement plan. This is an amount of money that we're never going to see again. So my opinion is spend it judiciously on things that will help the projects that the people have been asking for, such as downtown revitalization.
Thank you, Julianne. I agree with you. Any other questions or comments? Jason?
I'd just like to point out that to the extent needed, a number of future projects could be funded through debt issuances as well, to the extent that they pertain to capital development.
Sure. Kristen?
Will you remind me again when we have to have spent the money? Isn't it a 2-tiered thing? Can you explain that again?
John, you can.
Yeah, it needs to be committed by December of 2024 and expended by 2026.
2026.
The entire
Yeah, December of 2026 is the deadline.
the entire amount. Okay.
Yeah, so we need to have voted on things by the end of December of 2024, entered into contracts and so forth, and then sent out the last check 2 years later. So we have a little under 2 years to make final determinations on how the money gets spent.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Okay. I have one member of the audience with a hand up, George Brinkle. If my computer works. Chief, maybe I'm not a host anymore after my resumption. If you could bring him in. Thank you.
No, you're still a host.
Oh,
Hello?
I couldn't do that. George, if you could identify yourself,
Hi.
please.
George Brankel, 3 Little Pond Road. I'm also a member of the Appropriations Committee. Again, and this is building on some of the comments that, Jason and Scott have made. We have these projects in front of us that are must-dos. We have the money to do them. To take on debt to do those projects, again, for future projects at the moment that are unspecified, does not seem like a wise way to proceed to me. People keep mentioning that there's, potential for a return on investment. If we have one of these projects actually gets developed, so we actually know what it is, what it's going to cost, and what the return will be, if it has this return on investment, it will make sense to issue debt to do that project, and it will be easy to do. But to hold this up and to just not deal with these things right now, because there may be some sort of future return on investment, doesn't make any sense. Defining the project, coming up and saying, here's what it is, here's what it's going to cost, here's the return, it will be obvious of what we need to do and how to fund it. I really don't like the idea of sitting on money because there may be some potential ephemeral future return on investment that's never been specified. Thank you.
Thank you, George. And thank you, Chief, for re-enabling my responsibilities here. Lisa Maselli, and next.
Lisa Maselli, 13 Maple Street. Would it be possible to take these 2 items and put them in with the items that you'd have for the next meeting, and to be able to have them all together to make a decision on based on everything that has been brought forward, not just these 2 items that are and have been already put in the capital plan? And last time I heard, the capital plan was 2 years that they were going to already have what be planned. Now, why are we buying it early? And the amount of money that could be saved on, let it be repaired for a while and then let it go next, because prices of vehicles are coming down now. They were jumping up because of the pandemic, and now they're starting to come down. So we may even get something for $700,000 if we wait a little while. But I'd like to see everything all together, not just tonight's 2 and then whatever you do the next meeting.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll address that briefly if I could. My understanding is John needs to know now whether or not we're going to fund these with ARPA so that he can prepare the town meeting warrant on the assumption that we do want to go ahead with a project that's not funded by ARPA. Is that accurate, John?
Yes, I can't wrap up the capital budget documents or the operating budget or the town meeting warrant without a decision being made on these projects.
Okay. I mean, it is theoretically possible that we could not allocate ARPA money tonight. You could put it on a warrant, and then sometime prior to town meeting, we could fund it with ARPA, and then we'd pass over it to town meeting. I'm not suggesting that we go that approach. I think it is easier for everyone all around for the board to make its decision tonight and stick by it. Mike Hodge, you're right next. I'll bring you in. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you again, Chairman. I think it is critical for the board to be transparent. And I know the master plan identified beautification of downtown as a priority. I've been here 46 years. It's been a priority. I don't think there's debate that we do need to do something. I think the scope of the project is going to be large. And I think if the board undergoes committing a few $1 million, then comes to town meeting 4 years from now saying we need another 7. Hey, look, we've already spent this. We're kind of tied into it. It's not been vetted. It's not gone through committees. I think in the interest of transparency, the townspeople should have the right to vote on the scope and extent of the project at town meeting. Use the ARPA funds for things that have been in the plan, have been vetted, and are a clear and present need, not a want. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I will say that some will make an argument that none of these ARPA funds should be decided by 3 to 5 members of a board, that they should all go to town meeting. But these are the rules under which we have been given these funds. But again, you could make the argument that, well, the fire truck should really be decided at town meeting as anything else. And, regarding the downtown plan, that's going through the master plan committee. That's an extremely public process, one of the most public processes that I've seen in town to date. Fran Backstrom, or F. Backstrom, I assume it's Fran. Let you in.
Yep, it's me again. Thank you very much, Fran Backstrand, 76 Cedar Hill Road. To Select Person Hirsch's point earlier that the tax burden is going to be reduced now that you have agreed to put the roof through ARPA. Please be mindful that these are not the only pieces of the budget that are going to impact the tax base. Yes, maybe only $30 for the fire truck and the tank, but there are other aspects of the budget that can impact the tax burden of the residents. And even though Social Security did do something amazing at 8.75% increase in Social Security this year, it still becomes a burden, even $30 a year, $1 a month. No, not $1 a month, $3 a month for 10 months. It's still gonna be a burden. So I wouldn't be, I don't believe she was being cavalier about the amount at all, but we really should be mindful of the fact that if we can avoid increasing the taxes on our residents, we should do it. And the ARPA money is a way to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. Amy Paretsky, bring you in. There you go. Okay, Amy.
Hi, Amy Paretsky, 47 Indian Meadow Drive. And I'm sorry, I'm just tuning in, so I missed some of it. But I think what I heard was that the fire truck was 2 years out, so it could wait 2 more years. And there's also a chance that it could be repaired. With the downtown revitalization, there needs to be some funds for seed money. And I don't know if you can bond seed money for grants. The downtown revitalization is going to wrap up in April with the consultants. So I think there needs to be some seed money. If there's some grants that they can go forward with. I feel like something like a $900,000 fire truck should be something that goes in front of town meeting. If there's a chance it can be fixed, maybe people don't want to spend that much money if you can fix it. I know, like with my car, you can fix it and go a couple more years. It seems like an awful lot of money to take out of ARPA when you have 2 more years of ARPA money to make that decision. I see Chief Parente is raising his hand.
Sure. Amy, thank you
you
very much for your comment, and I'll hear that, Chief. Thanks. Chief, I suspect you're going to say that if there's a 2-year delay, it doesn't mean 2 years until you order it. It means you would order it when you have the money available, and then you wait 2 years before you get the truck. Is that accurate?
Yeah, accurate. The truck's due to be replaced now. By ordering it now, it's going to be 2 years past its replacement date. It's not like we can order it in 2 years, then we're going to be out even further. The truck is due to be replaced now. It's not sure how I got confused, but it's not due to be replaced because it's due to be replaced now.
Okay. Thank you. John?
I just want to draw people's attention to the memo that was provided on page 7 contemplates $250,000 to be used for phase 1 of the downtown design work. So that seed money is there. If all 3 projects, so we're clear, if all 3 projects are approved tonight, that still leaves $1.3 million available, of which phase 1 of the downtown project, based on everything submitted from the town planner, would be $250,000 of seed money. And the reality is projects like this, between design, construction, these are 3-year projects all day long. So if in the ARPA funding cycle timeframe, I think we'll be lucky by the time we finish rounding out what phase 1 actually is, deciding on that, getting seed money, applying for grants, getting the grants, signing contracts, and construction. I think you'll be lucky to get phase 1 of ARPA of the downtown project in the timeframe that we have to expend ARPA. I don't think people maybe fully appreciate the timeline that it takes to bid these things out, select contractors, negotiate contracts, and actually get things expended. So in the memo, in the remaining 1.3 million, if the 3 projects that are before you tonight is funded, there is ample funding for phase 1 design work of the downtown master plan. You're not going to get 3 phases of the downtown in for ARPA funding. There just isn't that much time. These things do take a good amount of time. So I just wanted to make sure people understood that.
So make sure I understand you correctly, John, that you're suggesting that we allocate at a future meeting another $250,000 from ARPA funds for downtown work?
No, what I'm saying is in preparation, we've asked, because I know the downtown projects, the downtown revitalization initiative, this is an initiative that's going to go for 5-10 years. This isn't something that's going to get done in 3 years. What I'm saying is, if you're holding money aside with the thoughts that you're going to fund the downtown revitalization projects, because it's multi-phased over many, many years, what I'm trying to say is there's plenty of money to fund the initial design seed money that we've been talking about. And again, this is a made-up number. It's a plug number from the town planner, based on experience that, we're probably looking at a $2.5 million project needing about 10% in design funds, 250,000. Again, none of this, we don't have, that detail yet. But my point being is, as this is laid out, it contemplates that there is ample funding for phase 1 seed money for the downtown project. If the board decides
that wouldn't include land acquisition or easements or anything like that, correct?
I don't know what it would include, frankly, because it's too preliminary. But you're going to run out of time with these ARPA funds if the thought process is we're holding to do the whole downtown project, first of all, and these are just really ballpark numbers. You're somewhere between 9, 12, $15 million. You're going to have to go back to town meeting for bonds on that stuff anyway. But in terms of just basic seed money, at least on the front end, what can be determined at this point, because it's unknown, the town planner just as a placeholder in the capital budget, we're including $250,000. So
but sometime between now and the next few months, I think we'll learn a lot more from the downtown study from master plan and be able to schedule those. We're not looking about doing $10 million right away, because I don't think we would, even if we had the money. But my preference is to hold on to some of that money so we can take some decisive action on the downtown project, if at all possible. And by the time we get to town meeting next year, we'll have a much better idea of that. And as I said at the beginning of the whole ARPA discussion, I think it is viable to then consider putting some of ARPA money towards the debt of towards the fire station construction project, which has gone up substantially over the last several years that's been sitting on a shelf.
We're either gonna issue debt for these projects or debt for the fire station. But you're gonna issue debt either way.
Agreed. Yeah, and that addresses the concerns of a couple of people seem to think that we wouldn't be issuing debt. We would or wouldn't. It's a matter of what are we issuing the debt for and when, and how quickly can we act. The ARPA funds give us the flexibility of acting very quickly, which town meeting does not. Any members of the board have any comments or questions? Okay. I don't see any other hands up from the audience. Is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I move the board vote to approve the release of $900,000 in ARPA funds to the fire department to purchase a replacement fire engine.
Second.
Motion been made by Scott, seconded by Jason. Let's see, all those in favor. Jason, how do you vote?
Aye.
Julianne?
No.
Kristen?
No.
Scott?
Yes, aye.
I vote no. The motion does not carry. Moving on to the tight tank. This is a project I'm also somewhat familiar with because I know it was discussed last year. I actually have a question on that. You know what? I have a question on the project just in terms of general scope, that I looked through some recent capital plans going back a few years, and I saw a $2 million project for rebuilding or for expanding and renovating the DPW garage that included this tank. And then a couple of years ago, it changed to being just the tank. So I'm curious about that and whether you foresee any future construction project of the DPW garage.
Well, handle that, John. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there was a feasibility study for a garage expansion done by the prior director. The consulting firm that we used for that study is the same firm that we used for the tight tank design. The funds for the expansion just didn't seem to be there in the capital plan. So I extrapolated out the tight tank. The tight tank design layout will accommodate a future garage expansion when and if it happens. But at this point, the garage expansion is not on the capital plan.
Okay, so that's been removed and you don't see that happening in the next 5 or 10 years?
Considering what other building projects are on the horizon, fire station, town hall, Fort West Miami, there's a lot on the table, and I don't see it coming up anytime soon.
Okay. All right. So again, the first question is this a project we are funding now? Either John or Scott, if you could give us a little bit of clarification. I know this is to meet a DEP requirement. What is the timing on that requirement? Are we at risk of being fined or otherwise this year or next year if we don't do this right away? I just want to understand the scope of this a little bit more.
So the conditions not being compliant came about when the MS4 stormwater prevention plan was implemented down at the highway garage. DEP, that plan was submitted to DEP. Mass DEP is aware of what's going on, which is, for those that don't know, we wash all of our trucks after every storm event and during the non-snow season in the garage bay. The garage bay has floor drains like all buildings do, and those floor drains go out to the septic system. We are not allowed to discharge wash water to our septic system. It's a DEP violation. DEP has not issued us any notification. So their first tier of noncompliance is an NON, notice of noncompliance. That typically is followed up by a written response indicating a time frame for compliance. If compliance doesn't come forward after the NON is issued, an ACO comes out, an administrative consent order. That typically has fines attached to it. Neither of those positions have been taken yet by DEP. They see that we have a tight tank on our capital plan. They understand that it's coming and we're doing the best we can with budgets. I would expect a notice of noncompliance to come to the town eventually. When that happens, I don't know. But it would be nice to not have an NON issued to Northborough for our highway garage.
Thank you for the description. Comments, questions from the board? Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I see this as being kind of like a compliance issue. I think we like to think of ourselves as good Commonwealth citizens and address these things before they become an issue, before they become a subject of fines and the like. I will support this request for ARPA funding to address this particular capital item.
Okay, Julianne.
Yeah, so tonight we've really had to make some decisions about projects that have immediate need and that could go before town meeting. So could we look at this in a little slightly different way? This gets brought up before town meeting, it fails. But since we haven't expended the money from ARPA, could we have that discussion after town meeting and say, it failed at town meeting. Scott says we get the non-compliance notification. We would still have money to fund it after town meeting should it fail. Is that a correct thought there?
John, do you want to address that? I mean, yes.
You know,
I mean,
we
would still have, as long as we still had the money, we could spend it on that again if we wanted to.
The point here is that we lay out the needs. We know what the needs of the community. Before the pandemic hit, we have a comprehensive capital plan that lays out all the needs. So we know what the needs are for the town. I think it's a dangerous approach of going, well, we'll send it to town meeting. If they fail to pass it, then we'll use ARPA funds. If you're willing to use ARPA funds, just use ARPA funds. But I think you don't want to go, when we go to town meeting, one of the reasons why we have had 14 consecutive years of success with every budget and every capital project is because they're well thought out, they're well framed up, the budgets are good. We go to town meeting and we say, we need this, and this is why. Then all the boards and committees review it, and the history for the 14 years has been that unanimous support, and you go to town meeting and you ask for it. I don't know that you want to start getting in a position where we're kind of throw things up at town meeting, and if they don't bite, then we'll figure out some other way to do it. Good planning requires us to lay out a plan, to all get behind it, and hopefully go to town meeting and explain as a corporate entity why something needs to be done and why it needs to be done now. So the short answer is yes. If it goes to town meeting and it fails, then you can, of course, use ARPA funds. But it begs the question of, if that's the case, why not just use the ARPA funds now? You're going to have to do this project, and you want to do other projects. The bottom line is it's all money for the town in terms of the tax impacts, and so when you look at these projects, we've got immediate needs. The reason why these projects came through and why the boards and committees are advocating for them is that there are known needs. We want to clear them out. Then if we're not issuing debt for these projects, then you have arguably the capacity and willingness of the taxpayer then to take on other projects that you want to do. This downtown revitalization is a long road to fruition, and you're going to need to go back to the taxpayers, multiple times for different rounds. But there's also, there's the fire station, there's the town hall, there's Peasley School, there's roadways, there's the complete streets. This is the whole point of, clearing out capital needs as you have the funds. And then, when you don't have the funds and you need to move forward with your next round of projects, that's when you go back to the voters and you ask for the funding. That's the thought process on the boards and committees, why why these projects are being recommended now. We have limited free cash, as I said in the memo. We got a little over $1 million. We know we got to do a bunch of small equipment replacements and cruisers and all that stuff. But these medium-sized projects like the roof and the engine and the tight tank, these can't be done with the rolling free cash. And so that's why they're being recommended for ARPA. And if you clear those out of the pipeline, it arguably creates capacity to do the thus undefined projects that may or may not come down the road. And to Mike Hodges' point, at that point, it goes through the boards and committees, it goes through town meeting, and if the support is there, it's there. But these projects have to be done, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, John. Kristen.
So as far as the tight tank goes, it sounds to me like, I guess I just don't 100% understand exactly what the tank does, and I would like Scott to pop back up. Thank you, Scott. And so we're not allowed to put salt in the septic tank. So can you just tell us exactly what the tank does, and environmentally sort of give us an overview of how the good things it does, and why the state requires us to have it?
Okay, certainly, through the chair. So flow drains are required to be tied into sanitary sewer systems when sewer is available. We do not have sewer available in this section of Main Street, so the highway garage is on a septic system. The septic system is under the large paved area that's kind of between the garage and the salt shed on the police station side of the building. When we bring our trucks in, we wash them down inside. You have to, you can't wash a truck outside in the winter. All the salt, oils, debris that comes off the truck goes into a floor drain and gets discharged to the septic system. Septic bugs, which are the critters that clean the sewage, so it's safe to be discharged to the ground, do not live happily in an oil-laden or salt environment. So we're not allowed to discharge like we were back when the building was built in the mid-'80s, our floor drains to anywhere but a tight tank. Tight tanks are just literally that, large underground tanks that the water goes into. We would pump them out periodically. We have one tight tank already that is at the mechanics bay. So the drains in the mechanics bay go to a small 1,000 gallon tight tank. The proposal here is to have a 20,000 gallon tight tank installed to capture the floor drains in the wash bay.
Okay, and the difference in this case between spending ARPA money and debt money would be, would you be able to get it faster, or?
Speed is not a concern for this project.
Okay.
Not yet. If DEP issues a administrative consent order tomorrow because they're watching the video tonight, speed all of a sudden becomes a priority. But yes. As of me sitting here right now, no, speed is not a priority.
Right. So I kind of feel like I did some math, and if we were to fund the tight tank, we would still have a little bit over $2 million of the ARPA money left. Am I right about that? So, and it is a rule thing. It is, the state has said we need this and we should buy it. And we're going to buy it either way, right? Whether we buy it with debt or we buy it with ARPA money. But I do feel like it's less than considerably less, about half what the fire truck is. And if we funded all three things, I feel like we lost an opportunity to have a lot of bang for our buck with the ARPA money. But I don't know. I'm definitely waffling on this one because it isn't as much, and it would really be nice to just sort of get it off the list. And it is a necessary thing.
Yeah, I look at the tank as something we've got to do eventually. It doesn't seem like it doesn't seem to me that it is the second or third highest priority capital item for the year. It surprises me there aren't any more or any higher priority capital items, but I appreciate it's made its way through the 5-year cycle. That it was originally a larger project for a renovation expansion that included the tank, and now it's just the tank. We've got to do it eventually. It doesn't seem to me, it does not seem urgent, either as far as difference between now or town meeting or even this year or next year. I think, leave that to the financial boards and the town administrator to determine this year or next year. That's kind of where I sit with it, but I personally I would rather hold on to the 400,000 and change for projects yet to be determined, if you will, and give this to town meeting. If town meeting rejects it, and we subsequently in another 6 months get an angry letter from DEP, then we have the flexibility with ARPA to consider that, as we do with anything that we want to fund with ARPA where we need to act quickly. This is an opportunity maybe to give the taxpayers a little bit of a break and consider whether this year is the right time for this project. Again, considering that it has made its way through the capital plan. Scott.
So I'll go backwards based on the comments you just made. So if you want to give the residents some tax relief, then do not incur debt this year on this project and use the ARPA funds. If you want to see projects that have gone through and you want the opinion of town administration and the other boards of committees, you have it right here. These are the projects that have gone through those processes. We know what the priority is of the department directors, of town administration, and of the boards and committees that are charged with keeping us to our proven financial policies. Tonight has been and should have been a discussion about risk and risk mitigation. We've talked about financial risk and the cost of money and the cost of doing delays. We've talked about schedule risk with the fire engine. If we don't get it, by deferring what last year, we added another year to the delivery schedule. We've not run that schedule list risk. That risk has occurred. That issue has occurred. Other elements of risk for this tight tank is a compliance risk. And now I don't want to play chicken with the Department of Environmental Protection and wait to see if they give us a notice of non-compliance or not. And the ultimate risk, and with what's happening here tonight, is the relationships. You were able to preserve the relationship with the school committee, the superintendent, and public education. You have now eroded the relationship of public safety with the deferral of the fire agent. And
I disagree with that, Scott. I strongly disagree with that. I'll let you continue.
Relationship with public works with the same discussion. You have the town bringing needs, critical needs to this board, and you want to game out whether something might happen or might not. This is, I'm going to stop, because I just do not understand the logic behind putting additional tax burden on the residents this year, knowing that there's these big ticket items coming and there will be tax burdens on the residents, and not reacting to the needs that have come through the proper processes in accordance with policies and through the proper procedures.
We have a member of the audience with a hand up. Does anyone wish to speak before I recognize that person? Jason, go ahead, and then Julianne, and then I will open it up to the audience.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to kind of emphasize the viewpoint that these capital projects, as Scott Rogers was just saying, have gone through the process, have been vetted, and in part there's a good faith understanding of all the parties involved. This board, town administration, the various departments and everything, that we have an agreement and understanding of how the process works. We understand the timeframes when these projects will occur, and a reasonable expectation that those projects will move forward. We've suffered a bit of backlog development in our capital projects over the last couple of years. We don't have the level of free cash this year that we might have enjoyed in prior years, and being able to knock off more of the capital backlog. It just seems to me that with at least one known large scale building project on the very near horizon, the fire station, the last thing we want to do is to knit together small debt issuances here while we're presumably trying to line ourselves up to position ourselves as best as possible in terms of financial stability, financial practices for the bond rating assessment that will take place for that project. It's very reasonable to me to want to kind of keep the decks clear as much as possible and to get the most favorable outcome for the fire station debt issuance. And to me, these discussions this evening have not really understood or served that larger purpose.
Thank you, Jason. Julianne, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to comment on the statement that this is a risk if we don't fund the tight tank right now. It's in the capital improvement plan. It will come before town meeting. It will probably get approved. I don't see the immediate risk. If the finance committee and the appropriations committee thought that it could wait a few years, I don't see what funding this, to get a 2-month head start is going to help at all. So that I just wanted to voice my opinion on that one.
Okay. Thank you, Julianne. I did promise that I'd bring the audience members in for a couple of times, and then Scott, after that ends, you'll be my first. Marilee Borden, welcome again.
Hi, thank you, Marilee Borden, 63 Little Pond Road. So I just wanted to go back to the idea of return on investment, and I remembered an example that was given that I think is something that, Mitch, as you put together the list for next week, I'm sure this is on it. Sorry, for next meeting. The idea of investing in solar. And I think particularly as you're looking to put a new roof on Proctor, it might be a prime opportunity to look at putting solar on the roof. And when we talk about reducing tax burden, if we invest in something that can have long-term return on investment and bring more money into our community, then that money can long-term reduce the tax burden on the citizens. So again, how can we use this money that we didn't know we were going to have a greater return and a greater impact on our community financially?
Well said. Thank you very much. Let's see. And George Brinkle, welcome back.
Hi, George Brinkle, 3 Little Pond Road. I just wanted to comment on Julianne said that the Appropriations Committee and Finance Committee said these projects could wait. And that's actually not the case. This week, the Appropriations Committee voted unanimously to support these 3 projects now funding ARPA funds. So I just wanted to clarify that. They did not say it's okay to wait. We can push this off. We didn't say that.
Thank you, George. All right. Hold on, George. I'm just going to lower your hand. And then we have Lisa Maselli. Lisa, briefly on the tight tank, please.
Lisa Maselli, 13 Maple Street. I want to know how many public comments were brought up during the appropriations and the finance committee this time. I've attended several finance committee meetings, and they really didn't offer us any opportunity to speak. even though we've been said, no, we really do. I've been there and there's no opportunity to speak. And this is the time when citizens should go or attend with Zoom, but we're not allowed to ask questions that have a better understanding of how these decisions were made. And without a full
Lisa, I'm gonna jump in for a second. I appreciate your comments, and I think there may be a point of discussion at some point as far as more meetings going to hybrid or something like that in the future. But at this point, the board is not directing any committee to hold their meetings any way, shape, or form, and how they deal with public comment is on their own. So, point well taken. I don't think it's applicable to the specific question that we have in front of the board here. So, unless you had something on the tight tank, I'll ask you perhaps to take that comment to those financial boards and perhaps make recommendations on how they could be more amenable to public input.
Well, that wasn't really why I said that. It was because there's no discussion of how it's so necessary now. And all of a sudden it's unanimous. Like, where is the discussion about it is my question. Has that, you talk about process, and the process doesn't happen well if there's no discussion by residents as well. And I think that's the question. It's not how the meetings are handled. It's how do you come to this process of being done correctly when there isn't any discussion and there's no public input.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa.
Mr. Chair, I can answer that question.
Absolutely.
I know town
Go ahead, Scott.
administration can well as well. So a vast improvement this cycle to both appropriations and financial planning is that the meetings were conducted and televised and live streamed. So not only is there ability for someone to attend in person like they always have and always is available for public input, and if public comes, there's opportunities for discussion. The fact that they were recorded allows folks to go back and watch those meetings as well. So I would say those meetings are even more open and more available to everybody than they've ever have been. So I think Ms. Maselli is incorrect in her statement.
I think I would like to see more boards offer comment and questions during meetings as we have. That's up to the individual boards. But I do absolutely
attended
recognize
all of them myself in person. I can say that anybody that attended in person would have been able to have their comments.
I think separate from this discussion, we could have certainly a lively discussion on the advantages of allowing people who can't make a meeting at a particular time and place being able to offer comments and questions. But point well taken that the improvement to televising and recording the meetings is very important. I'm very happy about that. Thank you. Back to the matter at hand. Any comments or questions on the tight tank?
I just have one last bit in light of the public comment too. I want to make it clear that I am not against some other projects. The issue is that ideas that were captured in April, ideas that were captured in June have never been specified. So I have nothing upon which to make a decision. If those projects had been specified in this intervening time, we would have something before us and we could make some comparisons and we can make some priorities. The problem was that work was never done. And so we don't have anything before us to compare. And when it comes forward, like community meals did, easy decisions, right? We have something concrete we can make decisions on. But I still don't have any details on any of these ideas that would allow us to make a decision and make comparisons to the three projects that we have tonight.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move the board vote to approve the release of $475,000 in ARPA funds to the Public Works Department for the design and installation of a DEP compliant tight tank at the highway garage located at 190 Main Street.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made by Jason, seconded by Scott. All those in favor? Scott?
Aye.
Julianne?
No.
Kristen?
No.
Jason?
Aye.
I also vote no. A vote does not pass. We did skip a little bit of a discussion on this item as to whether we felt this project should go forward. I get the sense from the board that we do feel it should go forward to town meeting. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Just to be clear, we don't need a vote on that. Any votes on the warrant will come when we approve the warrant. All right. That concludes item 5 from our agenda. Next item up on our agenda is discussion regarding the town administrator transition process. John and members of the board, as members of the board know, John has signed a contract to become the town manager in another town, the town of Foxborough. And just prior to this meeting, he did email the board a resignation letter. The board does not need to vote to approve that resignation letter because the rules of his contract is he just needs to give us 30 days notice, which he has, and then some. And John, in your letter, you said that your last date of employment would be, I believe you said April 7th. But you'd be taking that last week as a vacation week, although you did imply that you'd be working during your
Well, the whole
week,
point
and
was not to tell
will,
people that I'd be around and working because I need to clean the office and I want to leave things orderly for whoever comes behind me. So I do have that week. My last effective day of working is going to be March 31st. And then if I need a couple of days to finish making sure all the loose ends are tied up, I will, but I'll be taking vacation that week. So effectively March 31st will be my last working day.
John, thank you.
Can't lock me out of the building yet. I got one more week while I still should have access so I can finish cleaning things up.
Sure.
That's
Sure. Understood. Tonight's not the night, but the time will come where we will thank you for all the years of service to the town of Northborough. I asked for this item to be on the agenda so we could sort of talk a little bit about through the process of selecting a new administrator. This is something that the town has not done for a number of years. No members of the board were on the board the last time that administrator was chosen, either John or any predecessor. I've been through it once in another community, not while I was on the board. I served on a town administrator search committee probably 20 years ago. Generally speaking, the first step in a process is to bring somebody on to guide us through it, particularly because we're not experts in the process. So, John, I sorry to put you on the spot, but you and I had talked about you getting some prices or some options on releasing an RFP for a consultant that can help us through this.
Yeah. So there's a couple of. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, go ahead.
There's a couple of consultants that do this in Mass, and we've worked with one of them in the past, but there's no allegiance to anybody. So the thought process is if you're going to go out, you issue an RFP to hire a consulting firm, draft up basically what you're looking for in terms of those services. I do have several examples. I just didn't want to jam up your meeting packet with work product. I'm happy to forward that stuff along so you could take a look at it, but decide what the services are that the town would be seeking. In general, I mean, it can range anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 to do an executive level search. I think they probably, closer around about the $15,000 range. But again, it depends on exactly what process the board envisions, and how much of stuff the town would do versus the consultant. But if you're going to go outside, the first step would be put an RFP together, go through the selection process for a consultant, and then the consultant, when they come on, will guide you through the balance of the process. They'll help you draft a community profile. They'll do community input sessions, surveys, whatever the town envisions for input for the process. So again, there's a little bit of variation in terms of the cost, depending on how expansive you want that that input to be and what form you'd like it to take. But that's generally the process.
Thank you. A little bit more on details of that is that prior to John's departure, we will need to choose an interim. And we'll have that discussion at a meeting certainly before the end of March. And typically what happens is that the consultant also helps us update the job description and help us determine an appropriate salary to advertise based upon our input, and us determining characteristics of the type of person and experience that we might be looking for in an administrator. And then if we choose to go forward with that, we would form a search committee, which would oversee the collection of resumes that first come in. That search committee would do a screening interview of the candidates they felt that would be potential candidates to move forward to the board. That screening committee is not the Board of Selectmen, but could contain at most 2 members of the board. So it's not a quorum of the Board of Selectmen. And that screening committee or search committee would then forward some number of names, usually it's around 3, to the board. And then the board would conduct public interviews of those candidates and make a selection. There are a few variations and options in that process. We're not ready to sort of make any decisions tonight, but I do think it's a good idea for us to go ahead and issue the RFP for a consultant who can help us make sure that we do this right and thoroughly and legally and everything else. Don't know if there are any thoughts from the board. Scott?
So in terms of John, Becca, I mean, that's the way you've seen it happen in other towns. That's what you would advise us to proceed in this case, is to hire a consultant.
If you're going to look outside of the town, yes, then that's what you would do.
Okay, thank you.
And sometimes you go through that process and then you decide not to go out. So I think we need some professional guidance to even make that decision. But in all likelihood, my preference is to look outside and inside the town, not to exclude anybody. Julianne.
I really like the idea of getting a consultant. It takes the emotion out of the whole process. And, if this person can help us get community input in an efficient way and know how to do that well, I think that's a great idea.
Another aspect of this that the consultant can guide us through is timing. We can act as fast as possible and maybe have somebody in place in a couple of months, or we can be a little bit more deliberate. There's the practicality of an election in May that will change since we had an announcement from 2 members of this board that they wouldn't be continuing. 2 of 5 members of this board will be new after beginning of May. Pros and cons of waiting for some actions until then so that a full permanent board can make some decisions. But again, I'm not suggesting anything specific in timing that way, but the consultant will be able to help us through that. I'm not hearing anybody express opposition to issuing the RFP. Is there anyone has a concern with that? We don't need to vote on that.
I say go with it.
Okay. All right. John, if I can help you with this if you want.
Do you want
help,
me to draft something for your consideration at your next meeting?
Sure. I honestly, my preference is to draft it and issue it so that we can keep this moving. My concern is we wait until the next meeting and issue it and wait until the next meeting. And then all of a sudden it's the middle of March before we've even brought somebody on board to help us with it.
Okay.
If the board is comfortable, myself and Julianne as vice chair giving a final okay to an RFP, not the hiring process. Hopefully we as a board can make that determination in total. Scott, you had your hand up?
I would be more comfortable that the draft RFP come before the board for review at our next meeting.
Thoughts? Tie between Kristen and Jason. Ladies first, Kristen.
So is John writing the draft of the RFP? He is, right?
Yeah, he's offered to do so.
I can put something together for you. Really what it comes down to is just making sure where the expenses will stack up is how much. In some towns, they hold an event where the consultant runs each of the applicants through a general community where anybody can call in and ask questions. That's an additional expense. And I guess we could try to structure the RFP to ask the price proposal to kind of lay those things out. It would be, again, it really just it depends. There standard things that will occur in this process that's pretty routine. But some towns go way out with a lot of elaborate stuff. Others hold it very, tight. I can just tell you, like Foxborough, it was just the screening committee and the board, and they did a couple of community, pretty standard to have a community forum where people generally talk about the characteristics and the things that they're looking for. Beyond that, if you start adding things in, it just, it adds some expense. I just want to make sure that I don't want to speak for the board in terms of what process, the extent of the process that you're envisioning.
Okay. Well, I would be comfortable with you just writing it. I don't think I'd need to see it ahead of time.
My sense is it would be sort of the common process, and I'm sure there would be an hourly rate for things above and beyond. And if we did feel it necessary as a board to do something above and beyond, then we would know what that expense would entail. Any other thoughts, Julianne?
Well, to Scott's request, could we have a quick meeting next Monday and look over the RFP? I think there's a real time constraint here.
I think next Monday is President's Day. Is that a holiday for town hall?
Yes.
I'm not available.
I mean, I'm not totally opposed to waiting on it, but there is a risk of slowing down a bit. Honestly, if any member of the board feels that they'd want to review that at a board meeting, that's how I'm inclined.
Perhaps I can offer a compromise, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Why don't we draft it, send it out to the board, and then the board can decide if they want to hold a meeting to discuss it further, or if it's by default, it's fine.
I'm okay with that. Scott, does that address your concern?
Thank you. That'd be great.
Okay, Jason.
Obviously, we can't deliberate, as you all know, but just
right.
So people have some comfort level of seeing what it looks like.
Simply indicate whether you would prefer to have a meeting.
Yep.
That's the only question is, do you feel like we need a meeting to discuss this?
Right.
That's the only question.
Purely an
In which case
administrative question.
Yeah. And then we'll go ahead and if anybody wants a meeting, we'll go ahead and schedule that for as quickly as we can at that point. And it would be most likely a one topic meeting. Okay, so everyone's good with that? Okay. Thank you, John, for offering that suggestion. That makes a lot of sense. Does anybody else have any other items to talk about on the discussion regarding the town administrator transition process item? Okay, seeing none, we will move along. Discussion regarding residential electric aggregation program. Becca, I understand you're the local expert on this. Thank you very much for the information you submitted in our packet. Take it away.
Sure. So I'm going to do my best to be brief yet informative. There's a lengthy memo in your packet, along with a very detailed guide from the Department of Energy Resources, DOER, essentially explaining the process of implementing a municipal aggregation program. So I would encourage folks at home who maybe are not as familiar with the program to take a look at that guide, because it really does walk you through fairly detailed steps start to finish. By way of background, just so everybody has an understanding of how we got to where we are, in the late 90s, the state essentially passed an energy restructuring act that allowed municipalities to aggregate the consumer's electric load. So what that means basically is purchase electricity in bulk at lower rates on behalf of residents in any community. This provides some stability in the rates. As you know, basic rates under the utility companies fluctuate twice a year. They're very volatile. They're subject to markets overseas, et cetera. And so this aggregation program is a means by which communities can control the cost of the supply of electricity for their residents. Now, if you look at your bill, there's two rates, essentially. There's a supply rate and a delivery rate. This program impacts the supply rate, so essentially where your energy is coming from. It does not impact your delivery rate. That is a rate that's set by the utility company. That's the cost of maintaining the infrastructure, essentially, that brings your electricity into your home. So that's not impacted by this program. So we're looking at implementing a program to purchase electricity, the supply of electricity for residents. In 2016, Northborough began this process. The first step is getting the legislative body's approval. So in our case, that is town meeting. In April of 2016, electric aggregation went before town meeting in Northborough, and it did pass. That vote is still valid. So at this point, we are sort of surpassed the first hurdle. The next step would be for the board to issue an RFP seeking consulting services to assist us with developing an aggregation plan. So the way that aggregation gets implemented is that communities develop a detailed plan that has to adhere to DPU and DOER standards. And ultimately, it has to go before the DPU to get approval before the community can actually get bids for electricity rates and implement a program. So the next step in the process is to issue the RFP, to get some responses, and for the board to execute a contract, to move forward with a consultant and begin the development of the plan. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Julianne?
So one of the good things about doing this, besides hopefully stabilizing our electric bills, is that the town can require that a certain amount of the energy is from renewable resources, correct? Yes. So like what would be the cap on that? Like what's the average that a town would say we want? Would it 30%, 40%?
So that's sort of part of the development of the plan is establishing what percentage of the electricity supply do you want to be generated from renewable sources. There is a minimum requirement that electricity suppliers have to adhere to. That's a state requirement. I think it's in the 20%. I'm not positive on the number, but you know, the board can, in developing the plan, say, you know, just we want 50% of the electricity to come from renewable sources as part of the plan. You know, the caveat to that is typically the more renewable sources of energy that you have, the more expensive it costs. So, you know, Some communities have done two rates. So a base rate with a percentage of electricity from renewable sources, and then what they call a green energy rate, which essentially is a little bit more expensive, but it guarantees that a higher percentage of the electricity is being generated by renewable sources. So it gives residents the option, if they would like to know that the energy is coming from renewable sources and they want to pay a little bit of a premium for that, they can do that. So it sort of balances the cost savings with the sort of environmental incentive, if that makes sense.
So I don't understand. Does the town decide as a whole that we want 30% of the energy to be renewable, or does each individual customer do that?
So the board would be, with town staff, the board and the consultant would be developing this plan. The plan will establish all the different options that residents would have after the electricity supply is the bids are received. So you put together essentially what is an IFB with the consultant, and you say, okay, we want to offer residents a rate that has 50% of RECs, renewable energy certificates, and then we want an additional rate that has 75% of RECs, we want to get prices for those two options. And then when the plan is implemented as part of the education and outreach process that's required as part of implementing the plan, we would educate residents about, okay, these are your options. This is what it means. You can pay a little bit less and get some renewable energy, or you can pay a little bit more and get a higher percentage of renewable energy. So it gives each individual resident the option to choose whether or not they want to pay a little more, or they want to ultimately save a little bit of money and go for the lower rate. And these are, nothing is set in stone. Part of bringing a consultant on board is sort of hearing their expertise and what's worked and what hasn't worked in other communities. Everybody does it a little bit differently. It often depends on the goals of the community. If renewable energy and the environment is of high import to a community, then you may see them offering rates that have a higher percentage of RECs, or renewable energy certificates.
Thank you.
That answer your question?
Yeah. Can I just ask one more real quick one? Do you happen to know, okay, so now that our rates have gone up so much, part of it is the war. Are the customers who opted for renewables, are they doing better than?
It depends on the town and it depends on the plan. Going out to bid for energy rates it's also impacted by all the same things that basic rates are impacted by. Like those energy suppliers are going to be impacted by the same things that National Grid is impacted by. So a lot of, bringing a consultant on board is sort of hearing their expertise about what is the market doing, what's the timing of the market, because, when I worked in Grafton, we implemented an aggregation plan, and we got the plan approved by DPU. And immediately following the approval, the consultant we had on board said, you know what, I think you should wait 4 weeks before we put the bid out, because the market is a little bit volatile right now. And we think that if you wait a little bit longer, you might get better rates. And so a lot of it is really, you're relying on the consultant and their expertise in the energy market. It's sort of high risk, high reward, right? You can't predict these things.
I attended a talk on this topic at the MMA conference last month. And all of the towns that had been doing it for many, many years did experience the occasional moment, a few months at a time, where National Grid's rates was actually a little bit less than the rate that the town had bid at, just due to bidding timing. and the length of contracts that were bid out, but all of them had said the vast majority of time they were saving money, and sometimes a lot of money. I think it was the town manager of Auburn gave a story of where they went out to bid, and the rates came in really, really high unexpectedly. So they just sort of didn't take any of those. They did a shorter term bid to get by the high rate period, and then things got a lot better after that. And on the topic of the renewables, there are a number of different ways of structuring it. Some towns do it where the default rate is the higher renewable energy rate. So maybe the default is 75% renewable, and then a homeowner can opt for something a little bit lower of renewable to save a little bit of money. There are a lot of options that that we can walk through, and you can change those over time. You're not locked in on those. Some communities, when the prices went up, changed their default to a lower amount of renewable because of the high cost. And then once the prices drop again, that they may increase the renewable percentage. There's a lot of ways to do it. Any other questions? Scott?
Yeah, Becca, thanks for putting that all together and doing the research. I know that the energy guide has some warnings about some of the history with the suppliers that didn't turn out to be solvent, right, and ran into troubles and went underwater. In your research, did you find any criteria in which a resident right now could be assisted in evaluating alternate suppliers? Because that is a choice to everybody right now, right? We could individually go and get. Have you seen any guidance on that helps a resident choose between some of these alternate suppliers?
No, and I really hesitate to put any advice out there into the ether. Those plans come with a lot of caveats, and you have to pay very, very close attention to what you're signing up for. That's one of the benefits to municipal aggregation, is theoretically you're purchasing with a large pool, and you have people who you can hold accountable, right? That's us and you. At the end of the day, if things go south, we're sort of expected to be looking out for the residents' best interest. And if you go at it alone with a supplier, a competitive supplier, you don't have that same safety net or support system. And I think that's why you've seen a lot of communities in the last 5 to 10 years have there's been a strong push towards community aggregation, municipal aggregation, for that reason.
Okay, and that makes sense. I'm looking at the part of the report right now, or the link that that in terms of comparing plans that for residents, it's only 15% of individual residents have gone with a competitive supplier, and it looks like more are taking advantage of a municipal aggregation. Okay, thank you for that.
Any other, John?
Yeah, just because it's out there, I'm the one that brought that forward to town meeting to get the authorization approved. And if somebody's wondering, well, why didn't we move forward at that time? And I know I provided the board with a memo with some background, but at that point in time, we were entering a period of very low rates. And many of the communities that had entered into these aggregation contracts, their contracts were underwater, and several of the suppliers weren't able to honor the contracts. Basically, the market was such that every consultant that I had spoken to said, don't do it. Don't do it now, wait. And so that's why we hadn't proceeded. You have to take a long view of these things. We're not going to jump into the market and save a ton of money right now because the market is very high. So and it takes DPU 2 years to approve the aggregation. And that's something that is a little bit disheartening as well. So there were a combination, and one of the reasons they did that is because this initial round of these, there were a lot of people, a lot of contracts that were problematic. And so DPU sort of polished up a lot of their oversight and regulation. So things have gotten better. But I just want to caution people, this is a worthwhile endeavor, but you got to view it in the long term. There will be times when if you jump in at the market when it's high, then you're going to have to ride that out. In the long term, it provides stability and predictability, which is a good thing. But this isn't a short-term fix, and we're still looking at 12 to 24 months potentially for DPU to approve all this. But it's a worthwhile endeavor. But I just want people to realize it was not a good situation. We were in a very extended period of historically low energy rates, and there was no incentive to move into the market at that point. And at least initially, after we got the approval, we were advised not to. So, fast forward to today, we went through the pandemic and so forth. It's definitely something that makes sense, but I just want to temper expectations that this is a program that you enter into and you do it for the long run, and there will be significant, fluctuations. So just a caveat, but I just want people to understand why we got the authorization and then ultimately didn't pull the trigger. It's because the market wasn't supportive at the time. So, but we certainly should move forward now.
And Becca, it looks like the next step is to the issue solicitation for an energy broker step in here. Is there any action that the board needs to take to start that process?
Not necessarily at your blessing to put that on the street. The RFP has been drafted. There was a copy of the draft in your packet. It's pretty straightforward. We're looking for somebody with experience in the municipal market. Frankly, you can go on the DPU's website and view the plans from all the communities that have already approved plans for aggregation, and you can see the consultants that are working with those communities. There's only a handful of them. And it's, the handful have sort of saturated the market. So I have a pretty good idea of who's going to submit. And, I think at this point, we'll put it on the street, get some proposals, evaluate them, bring them back to the board for ratification. And then we'll start the process of putting together the plan, which is heavily involves the board and the community. There's a lot of community input that's required as part of the DOER and DPU process. So people will be hearing more as we move forward.
Thank you. The board, we don't need to vote. Board ready to ask Becca to go ahead and with that process? Okay, good. Sounds like that's what we'll do. Thank you very, very much again for the research on that, Becca. That item concluded. Now we get to accept a Stanton Foundation grant award for the design phase of the proposed dog park.
So I'm happy to speak to that, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like.
Sure.
So this is a real happy event. Lori Connors had submitted a grant to the Stanton Foundation. So we received a $25,000 grant to allow us to finish the design development for the proposed dog park. A real positive sign for this is that the Stanton Foundation, we're hopeful, will be a source of upwards of, maybe a couple $100,000 of potential grant funding for the dog park that we're pursuing. And generally speaking, if they give you, this smaller grant to move forward with the design, it means they're very interested in funding the next round as well. So before you tonight is just in order for us to expend those funds, the board needs to accept them for the purposes intended. And then Scott Charpentier, working with Lori, will move forward with the full design development for the dog park.
So we do need to vote on that, correct, John?
Yes, you need to vote to accept them for the purposes of the grant.
Okay. I did not catch that it was not in the proposed motions for tonight. So we both missed that one. Apologies. So if somebody, anyone would like to make a motion to accept the Stanton Foundation grant award for the design phase of the proposed dog park, that would be appreciated.
So moved. Or would you like a total?
No, just a so moved, I think, does it.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, motion made by Julianne, seconded by Scott. All those in favor, Scott?
Aye.
Kristen?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Julianne?
Aye.
I also vote aye. Vote is unanimous in favor. We have accepted the grant award. Thank you very much. Next up, we have reappointment of Terry Underwood to the Cultural Council. As described in the packet, this is off cycle based on how the Cultural Council works. And so that's why this is tonight as opposed to with the annual reappointments. John, is there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
Nothing.
Okay, very good. Anybody have any questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the board vote to reappoint Terry Underwood to the Cultural Council for a 3-year term to expire on February 28th, 2026.
Second.
Okay, motion made by Julianne, seconded by Kristen, and then Scott. I will, as far as discussion, I will add that the Cultural Council has a very unique process of term limits that don't apply, I don't think, to any other municipal board. The way that it works is once a member has served for 6 consecutive years, they can't seek reappointment for at least 1 more year. That's not applying, obviously, to Terry tonight, but I do believe there are 2 or 3 members that are kind of hitting that wall within the next few months. And there is a requirement under the state rules that you have to have at least 5 members on your local cultural council to receive grant funding from the state. So I will encourage any members of the audience that are still watching tonight, as well as any members of the board that know anybody that might want to serve on our truly excellent cultural council. Please fill out an application so we can get folks appointed before we drop below the 5 threshold. I'll remind people of that as many times as it is necessary until we get the right number on that board again. And we can have a very large board. I forget what the maximum capacity. It's like 17 or 30 or something like that. It's a big number. So if you're worried about one person getting it, not just go ahead and apply.
Yeah, there's at least 4 open positions. So yeah, get as many applications as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Sorry, we have to vote. Let's see. Scott, how do you vote?
Aye.
Julianne?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Kristen?
Aye.
I also vote aye. Vote is unanimous in favor. Congratulations and thank you, Terry. Reports. Let's see. Kristen, do you have any reports tonight?
Yes, I do. Quick one, promise. At our last meeting, we talked about making the vacancies on the town boards and committees easier to find, and now it's right there on the website on the right-hand side, right under employment opportunities, I think. Anyway, it's easy to find. So thanks for everybody who worked on that. The recent earthquake in Turkey and Syria has been on everyone's minds. I know I was wondering what I can do, and then I got this email from the Mary Ellen Duggan and the school department there. And it's on the Parent Square app too. They're collecting blankets, tents, sleeping bags, pocket warmers, diapers, any size, powdered baby formulas, dry baby food items, baby bottles, and flashlights without batteries. If you're able to donate any of those items, you can drop them off at any of the schools or the library this week in Northborough. And on Friday, they'll take them to the Turkish consulate for delivery, and Turkish Airlines is going to fly them to Turkey. So that's a really nice thing to be able to help out with. Kindness Week is coming up. Don't miss the fun community affairs events the committee has planned. And you can have coffee with either of the 2 chiefs, Chief Laver, Chief Parenti. You can have coffee with Becca. You can have coffee with Mitch, all the cool Northborough celebrities. So you can find details at their website or their Facebook page. If you just Google Northborough Community Affairs Committee, it'll come up. And quick quote. In honor of Valentine's Day tomorrow, love is like the sea. It's a moving thing, but still in all, it takes its shape from the shore it meets, and it's different with every shore. That's by Zora Neale Hurston. And that ends my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Jason, do you have any reports tonight?
No report tonight, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Julianne, any reports?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So back to Cultural Council. I I would like to report that I attended their last meeting and they are discussing a spring public art project again for Ellsworth McAfee. I know a lot of people enjoyed it last year and you can look forward to it happening again this year. And moving on to summer, they have set a date for their Culture Fest, which will be June 10th. And again, just a pitch for if you have any interest in the arts and culture scene in Northborough, or just want to be part of a really fun, vibrant committee, come to a meeting of the Cultural Council. Secondly, I am the liaison to the White Cliffs Committee, and they made their decision about which proposal for the building they thought was most viable for the mansion. They did decide to promote Metro West, which is the proposal that involves affordable housing on the property. So I just want to explain that their parameters for making this decision was limited to the proposals that they received from the RFP. And this process is not done. It will continue where there will be more opportunity for discussion. So that's the update on that right now. I just like to ask again that, we are, Scott, you mentioned we haven't really discussed specifics of ARPA distribution, but I continue to feel that we need some information about the buildings. And I know that there's a study that's going to be done. If we can help fund that and get that done quickly, or if there's a preliminary thing or a walkthrough like we do with the schools, I think that this would be very valuable information about when we come to decide on the remainder of the ARPA funds. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Julianne. Scott, do you have any reports tonight?
Just a quick update on groundwater advisory committees. So the planned public input session, part of the public hearing on the proposed bylaw changes, was continued until the 21st of February. That language probably will be very solid. I guess a question to us is whether we want to review that outside of our normal review of other warrant articles, if we want to take up that topic individually. I'm kind of asking a question during the report, but I mean, so there's an opportunity that if we wanted to discuss that, we could put that on the agenda. If not, it'll just come forward to us in the warrant articles. I will be individually participating in that public hearing when it occurs.
I would say if any member wants an agenda item on reviewing any proposed bylaw, just let me know. We'll have the opportunity when we review the warrant. But if someone wants something different or earlier, just send myself and John an email. Would be helpful.
Okay, that answers my report.
Okay. Thank you very much. Other than what was mentioned by other members, the only thing that I would like to add is 2 weeks ago on January 30th, I had the honor of speaking in front of 3 Scout packs or groups, or I forget exactly what their terminology is mostly for the Weeblo level. And I was asked to speak about what it is to be a member of the select board and some of the issues facing the town. And I would say they were a fantastic audience, mostly 10-year-olds plus or minus. They asked amazing questions about White Cliffs, really detailed questions about the fire station project, even getting into some somewhat obscure items that I suspect they may have heard about from their parents, such as plowing of private roads and how much the fees are. They were really a great group. I could have spoken with them for a lot longer than the time was allocated, but it was a really fun event. And I want to thank Ricky Bazant, who helped organize that and invited me to do that. If anyone else gets an opportunity to do something like that in the future, please take advantage. And that ends my report. Is there any other business for the board this evening?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, we do have an executive session scheduled this evening. There's nothing to vote on. It was general update. Given the hour, my recommendation would be to hold it to your next meeting, if that's acceptable to the board.
Any thoughts?
That is acceptable to this.
Okay.
Sounds fine to me.
I don't hear any raging objection to that. So, all right. So we will dispense when it comes time. We do have one more slot for public comment. If anyone in the audience wishes to speak to anything, whether it was on our agenda or not. Kelly Goodnight. We usually don't have people at this last one, but we do. Kelly, bringing you in.
Hi, thank you so much. Oh, I know how it is to have those last minute audience sharing. So I couldn't resist. I just wanted to thank you all very much for approving the ARPA funding for the Proctor roof. You've made a lot of Proctor families very happy about that. And you've also made the school committee very happy in the school district. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. And then the only other thing I was going to mention, and I wasn't going to mention it until Julianne said it in her report, was about White Clef. I can't wait to hear more about it. The affordable housing thing, I know that could definitely impact the schools. So I hope there's going to be some more information about that also. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kelly. I anticipate that our next meeting will include a discussion item on White Cliffs with a presentation by that board. Once that gets ironed out, we'll know that with certainty. We might be there until a late hour again, based on the things that I'm hearing on that project. There being no other items and our decision to dispense with the executive session of this evening, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Jason, seconded by Scott to adjourn. All those in favor, Julianne.
Aye.
Scott.
Aye.
Jason.
Aye.
Kristen.
Hi.
I also vote aye. Vote is unanimous in favor. We are adjourned 10:30.